Who am I? You sure you want to know? The story of this iceberg is not for the faint of heart. If somebody said it was a happy little tale, if somebody told you it was just an average, ordinary iceberg, not a care in the world, somebody lied. But let me assure you, this, like any iceberg worth explaining, is all about a girl. Wait, no, it's actually about Spider-Man. Scratch all that. With the announcement of the second MCU Spider-Man trilogy, Insomniac's Spider-Man 2, Across the Spider-Verse Part 1 and Part 2, and Spider-Man Freshman Year, it's a pretty great time to be a Spider-Man fan. Also, since the Spider-Man Iceberg is easily the most popular video I've ever created, and will never be topped, why not do another one? So here I am again to talk about cut Spider-Man content, weird storylines, Easter eggs, alternate versions of Spider-Man, weird villains, trivia, references, etc. Let's begin.
Holy shit! It's Spider-Man!
Spider-Side. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man issue 399 in January 1995, Spider-Side is yet another clone of Peter Parker that originated from the Clone Saga. Originally working for Jackal, Spider-Side is an interesting clone as he hasn't really done much in like 20 years, and he also has the power to shapeshift and stretch his body, so he's a rather unique Spider-Man clone. He was given these powers by Jackal as a way of giving Spider-Side the advantage against the real Spider-Man, because, like I mentioned, originally Spider-Side worked for Jackal, so when he came to face with the real Peter Parker, along with two other clones, Kate and Ben, and Mary Jane, his programming kicked in and he tried to kill them all, but he failed and was killed, only then to be resurrected and work with Jackal to murder 2,600 people via bioterrorism. And shortly after this, he was placed into a status chamber to prevent him from dying after turning into goop. Yeah, he fell off a building, turned into goop, and then was put into a status chamber. I'm obviously downplaying this for comedic effect, but you know, I mean, he is goop at this point, right? And that was in Spider-Man Maximum Clonage Omega, released in July 1995. And since then, he hasn't done anything of note in the past 20 plus years. That is until I started writing this iceberg. Yeah, out of nowhere, Ben Reilly's Spider-Man issue 3, released in March 2022, Spider-Side returned as the twist villain of that comic run. What are the odds that I start working on the second Spider-Man iceberg, talk about Spider-Side, and then suddenly he shows back up after like 20 years of doing nothing? Insane coincidence. Spider-Cat. Despite only appearing in 2 issues, first of which being Spider Island, I Love New York City, released in September 2011, Spider-Cat has become a well-known Spider-Man variation. In his universe, he was just a simple house cat to a group of gamers. He'd often battle a venom pigeon in his dreams, and that's kind of it. Like, he's just a cat with Spider-Man's powers that appears in, like, 2 comics. The second of which was Amazing Spider-Man issue 7, released in October 2014, as part of the Spider-Verse event, only for him to be almost immediately murdered by the villains of the story, having his life essence removed from his body. So, Spider-Cat's dead. But hey, at least the Insomniac Spider-Cat's okay. Iguana. Poor Iguana. First appearing in Peter Parker The Spectacular Spider-Man issue 32 in April 1979, Iguana is the product of Curt Connors trying to cure his lizard condition. Curt Connors, doing something very bad, tested the cure on an animal. An iguana, in fact. And because this is a comic book, the iguana mutated into a monster with the memories of Curt Connor, which caused him to understandably freak out and battle Spider-Man. During this encounter, Iguana had his powers removed, and he went back to being a normal iguana. That is until like 20 years later when he returned with no explanation in the Central Park Zoo, leading a group of crocodiles. Since then, he became a very, very minor recurring villain, until eventually in Amazing Spider-Man issue 18 in March 2019, he was killed off. Iguana is a very forgotten about villain that's normally just seen as, what if the lizard was lame? But in reality, Iguana actually has some unique powers. For example, he can actually hypnotize humans and communicate with normal reptiles. Wait, lizard can do that I'm gonna be real with you, I don't remember a single instance of this, but I'll take the wiki's word on this. Despite his rare appearances and unpopularity, Iguana has appeared in 2 different video games, the mobile game Spider-Man Unlimited, and the Amazing Spider-Man 2 the video game, where he was once again a creation of Curt Connors. In this universe, he battled Spider-Man and was eventually killed by Kraven the Hunter, after Spider-Man beats him in a fight. Into the Gwenverse. So there's the Spider-Verse and the Venomverse, but starting in March of this year, 2022, a new verse storyline was created called Gwenverse. In this story, she travels through the multiverse meeting various different Gwens, like Iron Gwen, Captain America Gwen, Thor Gwen, Gwenarine, Nightbird, which is like a Batgirl homage, and probably Gwenpool will show up eventually, I don't know. Yeah, here's the thing. This is kind of hard for me to talk about because I'm writing this entry on March 18th, 2022, and the second issue of Gwenverse doesn't come out until April 20th, 2022. So I don't really know how many Gwen variations are going to show up. So I can't really do like the montage of variants like I did in the last video for Spider-Verse and Venomverse. Except I actually can, because in celebration for Gwenverse, all throughout February 2022, Marvel released covers for various different comics that featured new variations of Gwen, like Gwen Grey, Phoenix Gwen, Gwen Steek, Gwenna Frost, Gwenamo, Rogue Gwen, Captain Gwendolyn, Gwenbit, Gwenclops, Gwenverine, again, Polaris, the Mistress of Gwenetism, etc. And before someone comments, yes, I know that Gwenverine first appeared in the 2015 Secret Wars. Spider-Man and Elsa. Yeah, we're talking about Elsagate. In 2017, people became aware of a growing trend on YouTube, where a series of strange YouTube videos made for children that would star copyrighted characters, most notably Elsa from Frozen and Spider-Man, though characters like Captain America, Venom, Hulk, Batman, Joker, etc. were often used as well. These videos, while advertised for kids, were usually extremely inappropriate for children, and featured things like sexually suggestive stuff, swearing, drug use, alcohol use, a lot of needles, I mean a ton of needles, they were obsessed with that, surgery, torture, abuse, and a lot, and I mean a lot of fetishes. While normally either live-action skits played out by grown adults in Party City costumes, or crude animations, sometimes they'd actually involve actual children, which is very, very bad. While there still is Spider-Man and Elsa content on YouTube, it's been drastically reduced after YouTube made it their mission to mass delete these channels for breaking several site guidelines. One final thing to note about these videos is that they were made exclusively for profit, and they made a lot of that, with millions of views on each video, filled to the brim with ads. So there's a good chance most of these channels got away with a lot of money. Scorpion pretends to be Spider-Man. What many people forget is that Scorpion in the mainline 616 universe actually has taken up the mantle of Spider-Man before. In fact, he actually posed as Spider-Man with the help of Venom as part of the Dark Avengers. This was part of the, well, Dark Avengers storyline, where Norman Osborn created a team called, the Dark Avengers. A new team of Avengers who were directly sponsored by the US government. And so Norman took a bunch of criminals like Scorpion and gave them new jobs as Avengers. This is also where Norman Osborn becoming Iron Patriot comes from. During his time as Spider-Man, Scorpion would do the normal Avengers stuff like fighting bad guys, good guys, murdering criminals, murdering strippers, and framing J. Jonah Jameson for the murder, etc. You know, the classic Avengers stuff. Eventually, his run as Spider-Man would come to an end when Norman ordered the Dark Avengers to attack Asgard and, well, while there, the real Spider-Man removed Venom from Scorpion. This wouldn't be the last time, though, that Scorpion would fuse with a Venom symbiote. He would later make a deal with the US government to be taken out of prison to join their Symbiote Task Force, where he'd fuse with one of Venom's new kids. This wouldn't really last long, though, as he was quickly defeated by Spider-Woman. Though recently, in Venom issue 28, released in September 2020, Scorpion fused with yet another symbiote, one from a different dimension, and became Scorpion. He didn't have a new name, he was just Scorpion, but now he's like a green tentacle monster. Though this didn't last very long, and the symbiote was killed just an issue later. Yes, Scorpion's been using a lot of symbiotes for a really long time. I wonder if we'll actually see this in the MCU. Future Foundation. So you might recognize the Future Foundation suit from a variety of different video games, like Marvel Avengers Alliance, Fortnite, Spider-Man PS4, Avengers, kinda, the Amazing Spider-Man game, kinda, Edge of Time, LEGO Marvel Superheroes, etc. So what's the origin to this suit? Well, as the name suggests, it's the outfit Peter wore while working as part of the Future Foundation, a team led by Reed Richards. Now, Peter only joined the Future Foundation because Human Torch had put it in his will that he wanted Peter to join. Oh yeah, he died for a bit, but don't worry, Human Torch is back. Because it's comics, nobody actually dies. Unless you're Goliath, because he still hasn't come back. I mean, I'm not saying, bring him back, I'm just saying that, damn, the one hero that stays dead, I guess. Anyways, the Future Foundation was created by Reed because he wanted to mold a team of young heroes as they mature, so that they could come up with solutions to the world's problems. As for the suit Peter wore, it was made out of unstable molecules that allowed his suit to repair itself and never get dirty. Pretty handy when you're wearing a white suit. Anyways, he wouldn't work with the Future Foundation permanently, as he'd eventually leave the group off-panel. Yeah, he just kind of stopped showing up to missions, so I guess he just dipped. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. In JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 6, Stone Ocean, you can very briefly see Sam Raimi's Spider-Man in the chapter Bohemian Rhapsody Part 4, when some dude tries to shake Spider-Man's hand. This is because the author and creator of JoJo, Araki, is a pretty big fan of Western media. When this chapter is eventually adapted into the anime, I highly doubt this will be included. And if it is, it'll probably be a non-copyrighted character. Ashley Barden. Ashley Barden, aka Spider-Girl, aka Spider-Woman, aka Spider-Bitch. No, I'm not making that last one up, that's an official title she held. Is the granddaughter of Spider-Man and the daughter of Hawkeye. So, Peter's daughter married and had a kid with Hawkeye. But, Hawkeye knew Spider-Man when he was, a teen. That's kind of weird. This isn't just any Hawkeye. This is Old Man Hawkeye from the Old Man Logan universe. A post-apocalyptic universe where most of the world's heroes are dead, and the United States is ran by the supervillains. Or in Hulk's case, having kids with his cousin. Hulk, I get that She-Hulk is hot, but, my man, that's illegal. You can't do that. Anyways, Ashley has all the Spider-Man powers you'd expect, like wall crawling and super strength. But she's missing one crucial power. She doesn't have spider sense, which is kinda one of the biggest spider powers. But that doesn't stop her from kicking ass, as she decapitates the new Kingpin. Yeah, she was at war with him for a bit, as he ruled over the land that she, along with Daredevil and Punisher, lived at. So the three of them then teamed up and, failed to defeat him originally, which resulted in Daredevil and Punisher being fed to dinosaurs. But Old Man Hawkeye ended up saving Ashley, dying in the process. This allowed her to get revenge on her dead dino food friends, and, so she decapitated Kingpin. Thankfully for Miss Barden, she's been able to leave her universe from time to time, as she showed up in both Spider-Verse and Spider-Geddon. There's also been other variations of her, like in Venomverse or in another Old Man Logan style universe. That's not the original Old Man Logan universe, it's a different one, but it looks like the same. #TASM3. After No Way Home was released, fans began pouring onto Twitter, Reddit, and YouTube, asking for Sony to make another Amazing Spider-Man film starring Andrew Garfield, due to his performance in the film. Seemingly in response to this demand, Sony responded on Twitter saying, "Yes, we've seen the hashtag. No, we don't decide which movies get made. We're just the social team." So will the Amazing Spider-Man 3 happen? No. It's not going to happen. They're more than likely just going to retcon him into the Sump universe, which is not a good idea in my opinion, because say what you want about the TASM films, but, do you guys really want Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man hanging out with Morbius? But hey, who knows? Reliable leakers have said Sony wants to do a movie starring the three Spideys, so I don't know. Iron Cat. In Black Cat issue 11, released in June 2020, Black Cat stole an Iron Man armor and called herself Iron Cat. Tony was not a fan of this though, so he beat the crap out of her and took back the armor. This happened because I guess everybody in the Marvel Universe needs to wear an Iron Man armor at some point. I don't know. Anyways, it was recently revealed that there would be a new Iron Cat limited series written by Jed Mackey that's due to start releasing in June 2022. As for its plot, all we know is that Iron Cat is back, but this time it's not Black Cat. So she and Iron Man have to team up to figure out who this mysterious new Iron Cat is. No Way Home cameos. Towards the end of No Way Home, when the multiverse begins to rip into the MCU, you can briefly see the silhouettes of many different Spider-Man related characters looking into the universe. All of these characters apparently know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, so who are they? Well, people claim to see Kraven the Hunter, Scorpion, Rhino, Black Cat, Superior Spider-Man, and Mysterio. Rhino, Black Cat, Kraven, and Superior Spider-Man I can see. Scorpion just looks like a big scorpion. In fact, I actually thought this was the Loch Ness Monster when I first saw the film, so I looked insane to my friends when I tried to explain to them that Nessie was in No Way Home and that she knows Peter's Spider-Man. Also, I'm not really sold on Mysterio. This could literally be anyone. I can kinda see a cape if I squint, but I don't know. No Way Home deleted scenes. Now that No Way Home is out, I can finally talk about the deleted scenes from that film. The first being a scene in which Harry Holland, Tom Holland's brother, played a drug dealer that would have been taken down by Spider-Man was cut. This was most likely removed for pacing issues. There was also an entire courtroom scene where Daredevil would have originally been introduced. A scene in which Morgan Stark returned was scrapped. There'd be another 4-minute long sequence in which the three Peters hang out. A scene in which Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man jumps onto Goblin's glider for a one-on-one fight was scrapped. My only big complaint about this movie is that Tobey Maguire and Willem Dafoe never speak to each other once. Why'd you scrap this? More footage of Peter's life at school after being exposed to Spider-Man was scrapped. And finally, a scene in which Peter, May, Doc Ock, Goblin, Electro, and Sandman stand in an elevator in silence until Sandman breaks the tension and asks, "Who farted?" I'm very happy this was removed. Also, while not a scene, Lizard was originally going to have a massive redesign in this movie to make it more comic accurate, but ultimately this was scrapped. Though he still did receive a redesign, it's just really, really subtle. There was also supposed to be a fight between Tom Holland's Spider-Man and Green Goblin when Goblin first showed up during the bridge fight. There was also originally intended to be 6 villains in the film, with the 6th villain ultimately being scrapped. Before that villain was scrapped though, Marvel and Sony toyed around with the idea of the 6th member being either TASMverse Rhino, TASMverse Green Goblin, Raimi New Goblin, Venom, or MCU Mysterio. American Chavez was intended to have a role in the film as well, as originally No Way Home was going to release after Multiverse Madness, and be the final installment to the MCU's little multiverse saga they're doing at the moment. Also, before No Way Home was settled on being a multiverse film, plans were in place to have Kraven the Hunter be the main villain in the movie, just in case Marvel couldn't get the actors from the Raimi and TASM films back. Sunk deleted scenes. I forgot to mention the deleted scenes from the Sony Universe and Marvel characters in the last Spider-Verse, but only Venom 1 was out at the time, so I guess it didn't really miss much. Anyways, for Venom 1, there was a scene in which Venom and Eddie argued with each other in a taxi while driving to the hospital was cut. This scene would reveal some details in Eddie's childhood, like how Eddie would steal toys from kids so that he'd be praised for finding them later. There was also a scene where Venom goes on a rampage because he was alerted by a car alarm. And finally, an extended version of Eddie's talk with Cletus was filmed, where Cletus would mockingly admit to cannibalizing the people he's killed. For Venom Let There Be Carnage, Carnage was going to take the form of a demon pope during the final battle, and would even crucify Venom at one point. He'd also give Venom a crown of thorns via his tongue. An extended scene of Venom and Eddie at the beach was cut, where Eddie would tell Venom that he doesn't love him. And finally, a scene in which Eddie evicts Sonny and Cher, Venom's chickens, from his apartment. A scene like this does end up in the movie, where he just places them in a park, where they're still at by the end of the film somehow. They just kind of like stayed there. But this version just has him shoo them out, and that's it. For Morbius, that Spider-Man graffiti in the trailers, not in the film. The Oscorp logo, gone. Morbius jokingly claiming to be Venom, still in the movie, but him revealing that it was a joke was cut. So I guess he just kind of like is claiming to be Venom. And finally, every scene with Vulture at the prison was cut. He just kind of like shows up to the Sunk universe, no questions asked, builds his own suit, which I don't think he did in the MCU, so I don't know how he was able to make this one, and then asks Morbius to help him get revenge on Spider-Man for whatever reasons. What an awful movie. Spider-Man Noir. First appearing in Spider-Man Noir issue 1, February 2009, Spider-Man Noir is a gritty version of Peter Parker living during the Great Depression. He gets his powers from a spider, obviously, but this was a special spider that lived in the Spider God Idol, which caused Peter to have visions of a spider god, granting him the powers of Spider-Man. This version of the character also carries around guns, like a Thompson or a revolver. And so, yeah, he doesn't actually have an issue with killing villains, or Nazis for that matter, because, yeah, most of the villains he fights are Nazis. This version of the character also has one of the more unique Spider-Man outfits, with him wearing a bulletproof vest and World War I aviator goggles. When he was introduced in his miniseries, he was so popular that little over a year later, he would be included as a main playable character in Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, voiced by Christopher Daniel Barnes, who you might remember for... He's a very popular variation of Spider-Man, who was even served as inspiration for the worst MCU Spider-Man costume. Also, he died. Yeah, in 2018 during Spider-Geddon, in issue 1 to be exact, he sacrifices his life in vain. But you know what else came out that year? Into the Spider-Verse. And that movie used Spider-Man Noir, and he was pretty popular in that film. So, 2 years later, in Spider-Verse issue 5, released in February 2020, he was resurrected. Again, further proving that Goliath is the only comic character that will stay dead. Venom 3. So at the moment, Venom 3 hasn't been 100% confirmed, but due to the massive financial successes of both Venom films, there's a very, very good chance Venom 3 will happen, regardless if the rest of the Sunk films get cancelled. There's been several different ideas tossed around about what Venom 3 could be about. Obviously, Toxin is being considered for the film, as Let There Be Carnage sets him up. But the film has also been described as a multiverse movie, so maybe a soft Venomverse adaptation? Hell, maybe he'll meet up with Raimi Venom. Director Andy Serkis has also expressed interest in returning for Venom 3, and even using the villain Grendel, a giant symbiote dragon, though he's also said he wants to explore other Ravencroft Institute villains. As for Spider-Man, he probably won't show up. As Serkis has said, there's way more to explore with Venom in future films before officially meeting up with Spider-Man. Also, Rhys Ifans, who played the Lizard and Tasm in No Way Home, has recently said he'd love to be in a movie where Venom and Lizard fight. Sorry, bud, but I can't see a Venom film with the Lizard being the main antagonist happening. The many 60s original villains. The 1960s Spider-Man cartoon is famous for, well, a lot of things, but one of them is the amount of original villains created for the show. While the show did adapt villains like Green Goblin, Scorpion, Mysterio, Sandman, Kingpin, Lizard, Vulture, Electro, Rhino, and Doc Ock, we also had villains like Caveman, Boomer, Igor, Snowman, Red Dog Melvin, Reptilia, Pod, Cowboy, Charles Cameo, The Fly Twins, Dr. Dumpty, Fiddler, Fifth Avenue Phantom, Scarf, Winkler, a robot version of Jesse James, Skymaster, and of course the iconic villain, Shakespeare. This was done to save on the budget. Because the show had a very, very low budget, by the time of the second season, the show was mostly filled with these new villains. Simply because, in order to use comic characters, the company that made the show had to buy the rights for those characters for each of their appearances. Last Stand. This is a variation of Spider-Man that first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man issue 58 in September of 2003. In this universe, Peter just straight up murders Kraven the Hunter, which leads to him being like, hey, why don't I just kill all my bad guys? This led to him being hated by all of his family and friends, even being kicked out of the Avengers. As an old man being hunted down by the police, he was eventually gunned down in a cemetery while visiting Aunt May's grave. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, he doesn't actually have much lore to him, but he's still an extremely popular variation of Spider-Man, mainly because of his outfit, and the idea of an older, grittier Spider-Man. This has led to Last Stand costumes appearing in Spider-Man Unlimited, Spider-Man PS4, and Shattered Dimensions. Miles Morales. First appearing in Ultimate Fallout issue 4, released in August 2011, Miles Morales is pretty much the second most popular Spider-Man, right after the original, even getting his own video game and lead role in the Spider-Verse film series. He originates from the Ultimate Universe, and became Spider-Man after witnessing Peter Parker die. But don't worry, Ultimate Peter Parker is alive and well again. Again, why is Goliath the only dude not allowed to return? Weirdly enough, the creation of Miles Morales stems from the 2008 US presidential election, when Marvel's then editor-in-chief at the time, Axel Alonso, said that while they were planning Ultimatum, they realized they were standing on the brink of America electing its first African-American president, and then realized that maybe it was time to take a good look at a Marvel icon. And so Miles was born, and was Spider-Man for most of the Ultimate Universe's run. Miles' powers also differ from Peter's in several different ways. Sure, they both got spider sense, superhuman strength, the ability to climb stuff, etc., but Miles also has the ability to turn invisible, use bioelectric energy threads that come from his fingers, and venom strikes, which are basically supercharged punches with electric energy. As Spider-Man, he's also gathered his own share of villains, like Prowler, Assessor, and Ultimatum, who is Earth 616's version of Miles Morales. Yeah, he's actually from the mainline universe, and differs from Miles in several different ways, like having a different origin, different power set, and is best friends with Pigpen. Though I guess he's no longer the main universe's Miles Morales, as at the end of Secret Wars 2015, Miles has been permanently transported into the main timeline.
The way he leaps off of rooftops and flips backwards to face the camera before falling into a headfirst dive is just full of the exaggerated swagger of a black teen.
What if Peter Parker kept the symbiote? Starting in April 2021, Spider-Man Spider's Shadow, written by Chip Zdarsky, is a What If miniseries that tells the story of what if Peter never stopped wearing the symbiote. In this universe, despite Mr. Fantastic telling Peter that it was a parasite that was messing with his brain, Peter was like, "Oh, okay, sure, dude. Whatever you say, man." And this led to some pretty bad things, like Hobgoblin getting his head crushed in by Spider-Man after Hobgoblin burns Aunt May alive. Spider-Man then goes on to kill Shocker, Electro, Rhino, Mysterio, Beetle, Scorpion, and Kingpin. Ultimately, it was J. Jonah Jameson that was able to talk Peter out of the symbiote. Well, that and an explosion Kraven set off, but still. The symbiote then went on to attack the Baxter Building. It even took control of the Fantastic Four for a brief period of time. But thankfully, because Human Torch is literally the perfect symbiote killer, they were able to kill it, and Peter turned himself in for the murders. But all the heroes were like, he was under brainwashing, so he got off and joined the Fantastic Four. Goblin Nation. First appearing in Superior Spider-Man issue 10, released in May 2013, Goblin Nation was a group of villains led by Norman Osborn, dead set on defeating Spider-Man, and they almost did as they slaughtered Superior Spider-Man's henchmen, the Spiderlings. And so Doc Ock Spider-Man, Superior Spider-Man, was beaten up. It was looking pretty grim, but then Peter was able to get his body back, and, Goblin Nation kind of almost immediately was defeated afterwards, as Peter was able to rally up the Avengers into taking down Norman and his nation of goblins. But luckily for the Goblin Nation, a new leader took up the mantle of Goblin King, Uric. Oh, right, I should probably also mention, Goblin King was the name of the leader of Goblin Nation, so Green Goblin was just going by that name for a while. And so, under his orders, Goblin Nation began to take in children to raise into criminals. So, think Shredder from the first TMNT movie. But I guess since Uric got killed by Red Goblin, Norman with Carnage, Goblin Nation no longer has a leader, or just isn't around anymore. I mean, their last appearance is in 2018, so who knows. Honestly, Marvel will probably put them on the back burner for like another 10 years or so, then bring them back in like a big old event storyline, and then disappear again for another decade. Spider-Man 2099. First appearing in Spider-Man 2099, issue 1, in September of 1992, Miguel O'Hara was your average, everyday, future teenage rebellious genius, who gets bitten by a spider. And by bitten by a spider, I mean he gets 50% of his DNA turned into spider DNA using a DNA rewriting machine, and only survives this because this is a comic book. This gives him powers similar to Spider-Man, which leads to him becoming Spider-Man of the year 2099. Created by Peter David and Rick Leonardi, Spider-Man 2099 was one of the heroes who kickstarted Marvel's 2099 era in the 90s, and is easily the most popular character from that era. I mean, when was the last time you thought of Punisher 2099, Hulk 2099, Ghost Rider 2099, or Doctor Doom 2099? Anyways, since his introduction, he's become one of the most popular alternate universe Spider-Men, appearing in various video games like Shattered Dimensions, Edge of Time, Superhero Squad, and LEGO Marvel Superheroes 2. It even has a skin in Spider-Man PS4. But recently he's shown up in Into the Spider-Verse, voiced by the legend himself, Oscar Isaac. But anyways, let's go back and talk about his powers and stuff. As I mentioned before, he has similar powers to Spider-Man, but not identical. Sure, he has superhuman strength, spider sensibility, and enhanced healing, but he also has talons on his fingers, which can be used as weapons. He also wears a completely indestructible costume that allows for gliding and has night vision. He's also crossed over with the mainline Marvel Universe several times before, like in Spider-Verse, Secret Wars 2015, etc. As mentioned before, he's easily the most popular alternate universe Spider-Man out there, besides maybe Miles Morales. Silk. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man issue 1, released in April 2014, Cindy Moon was bitten by the same radioactive spider as Peter Parker. This granted her spider-like powers, similar to Spider-Man, but not exactly like them, as she has all the normal spider abilities, but with the addition of claws and organic webbing. After her powers came to her, she was then trained by a man named Ezekiel Sims, until he realized a guy named Morlun, you know, the Spider-Verse Morlun, who went around murdering thousands of Spider-Man across the multiverse, was tracking her. And so Ezekiel locked Cindy in a bunker with food, water, and entertainment. And there she stayed for 10 years. When Peter found out about her, he rescued her and they started banging, almost immediately. You see, she instantly started fooling around with Peter because of their shared spider sense. So basically, if two people get bitten by the same radioactive spider, they become very attracted to each other. But anyways, after being freed by Peter, Cindy Moon became the superhero Silk, and has appeared in tons of comics ranging from a supporting role in Spider-Man stories, to big crossover events like Spider-Verse, to her own comic series. She's shown up in the MCU, in name only, will be starring in the female-centered Into the Spider-Verse spin-off film, and will be starring in a sunk Amazon Prime series that probably won't get made. Ben Reilly. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man issue 149, released in July 1975, Ben Reilly is one of the many clones of Peter Parker. Created by the Jackal, he was originally a one-off villain who fought Spider-Man and then disappeared from the comics. That was until the Clone Saga starting in 1994, where Ben would return as the Scarlet Spider. And I can go into the Clone Saga again, but an extremely too long didn't read version is that there were a lot of Spider-Man clones, Peter and Ben each thought that they were the real Peter, and eventually Peter was revealed to be the real one. It was pretty complex and confusing, and overall not really liked by people. But people did like Ben, and because of that popularity, Ben was resurrected after his death at the hands of Green Goblin, only to then die again. But then he was brought back. But then died again. But then was brought back, and is currently still alive, though at the moment as a villain named Chasm. Throughout the decades, he's become a fairly large character in the Spider-Man multiverse, as he's shown up numerous times in mainline comics, his own comics, big event storylines, and even cartoons. Mania. First appearing in Venom issue 31, released in February 2013, Andrea Benton was living a pretty hard life, until she eventually met Flash Thompson, and realized that he was actually Venom. This naturally got her attention, and when Jack-O-Lantern, we'll get to him later, trust me, tried to kill Andrea, Flash protected her with a portion of Venom, which ended up bonding with her by accident. And so she became the villain, hero, anti-hero, Mania. She would fight crime as Mania for some time until she'd eventually lose the symbiotes and bond with Scream. But then she'd lose the Scream symbiotes and then bonded with Silence. Yeah, she's been through a bunch of symbiotes. Her powers also differ a lot from other symbiote bonded characters. For example, her Hell Mark, which was accidentally given to her when the Venom symbiotes bonded with her. Basically, Mephisto at one point had put a Hell Mark on the symbiotes, and then when she bonded with the symbiotes, she got it. This allows her to have superhuman healing, create portals to hell, summon demons to fight for her, create demonic weapons, and can even transform into a demon.
Don't miss out on the action. We'll be right back to Spider-Man Maximum Venom on Disney XD.
To fight evil, Spider-Man will go anywhere, anytime.
A superhero's gotta do what a superhero's gotta do.
Whoa, Spider-Man!
Sorry I can't hang around.
Because the action's at McDonald's. Take a break with a hamburger Happy Meal for just $1.99. There's Spidey, Spider-Man characters, and hot cars with cool moves. One with every $1.99 hamburger Happy Meal you buy your kids.
Spider-Man, I just saw Scorpion in the drive-thru.
Have a nice day. Thanks.
Swing into adventure. Now back to Spider-Man, right here on Disney XD.
Webman. Appearing in Spidey Super Stories issue 25, released in May 1977, Webman is the first ever clone of Spider-Man. He was created by Dr. Doom of all villains, who used a twin machine after tricking Spider-Man into looking at a mirror. However, Webman had one problem. While the twin machine was able to create life, it basically made bizarro versions of whoever it cloned. So instead of being extremely smart like Spider-Man, Webman was extremely stupid. Upon realizing this, Doom attempted to create another clone, but Spider-Man showed up and destroyed the twin machine, and Doom was arrested. Though Webman was never actually arrested, so I guess in the Spidey Super Stories continuity, there's just a stupid clone of Spider-Man walking around. Also, Webman appears in the cover of Spider-Verse issue 6, released in March 2020, though he doesn't actually appear in the story. TASM 2 MP3 player arm. So originally, Spider-Man's design in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was going to have a built-in MP3 player on his web shooters. This was apparently Mark Webb's idea, and I don't really have anything else to add here except that this idea made it to concept art. The Rhino, Electro, and Sandman movies. In November 2021, it was reported by reliable leakers that Sony is planning on making a solo Rhino movie and a solo Sandman movie. And then, a month later, after the release of No Way Home, it was reported by more reliable leakers that Sony is also planning on giving Electro a spin-off film, after Jamie Foxx's performance in No Way Home received critical acclaim. Now, I doubt any of these movies will actually happen. The only one with a chance of happening is Electro, and that's only because Jamie Foxx's star power. But hey, who knows? I mean, Morbius got made. Glass Man. So in Spider-Man 3, we see Sandman turn to mud after getting wet. Well, did you know that he can also turn to other things? In the Incredible Hulk issue 114, released in January 1969, the Mandarin and Sandman, what a weird pairing, teamed up to defeat the Hulk. They succeeded in capturing Hulk and Betty Ross, only for Hulk to break free after finding out Mandarin and Sandman were holding Betty Ross hostage. Mandarin then betrays Sandman upon concluding that he's a failure, and pushes the Man of Sand into a pressurized vat that turned Sandman into a being of pure glass. And so Hulk decides to murder him, but is stopped by Betty Ross, who tells him to spare him. He'd continue to be Glassman for a brief period of time until he was temporarily cured thanks to the wizard. Eventually, though, he'd be cured of his glass condition for good after a blood transfusion from Betty Ross. Sadly for Sandman, though, this wouldn't even be remotely the last time he'd be turned into glass. Lady Spider. First appearing in the Spider-Verse arc, May Riley was your ordinary girl living in a steampunk society. Her father was a scientist that did some testing on animals, and so one day May decided to free the animals, because, testing on animals is just, objectively morally bad. However, when she tried to free the spider, Spider-Man stuff happened, it bit her and, you know the rest. After her father died, she'd go on to use spare parts from his garage to create a steampunk Spider-Man suit with 4 mechanical arms. In fact, she actually couldn't wall climb and relied on these arms to climb walls. Though she did get the rest of Spider-Man's powers, including super strength and all that. And so she became Lady Spider, and mostly fights in multiverse-spanning Spider Wars. I think a miniseries set in her world would actually be really cool, but as of right now, she's only appeared in crossover events, like Spider-Verse, Spider-Geddon, and Electroverse. Yeah, Electroverse happened. But hey, at least she's shown up in Spider-Man Unlimited and LEGO Marvel Superheroes 2. Spider-Man Lotus. Spider-Man Lotus is a fan film being created by G.J. Cunup, about Peter Parker dealing with the aftermath of Gwen Stacy's death and comforting a terminally ill child. Spider-Man Lotus isn't out yet, but it has received a release window of summer 2022. The film was funded via Indiegogo and received $112,079, which is a good amount of money, I'd say. The film also has an original spider suit designed by Diego Da Trinti with a custom logo created by Evan Jackson. The trailer for the fan film has been out for a few months now, so I highly recommend checking it out and keeping an eye on the project. It's looking great so far. Here's hoping that Lotus Timmy gets a power grid, so we can power scale both versions of Timmy. Peter Parker almost robs a jewelry store. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 87, released in August of 1970, Peter thinks he's losing his powers. This causes him to become really stressed out and borderline delirious. It's during this period of time when Gwen Stacy is celebrating her birthday, and Peter doesn't have a gift. So, in his delirious state, he decides to break into a jewelry store to steal a pearl necklace. However, while doing this, he realizes what he's doing and snaps out of it. so he doesn't end up stealing the necklace. But he still broke into a jewelry shop with the full intention of robbing it. Oh, and it turns out he's actually not losing his powers, he just had the flu. Web of Shadows cover vote. Before the release of Spider-Man Web of Shadows in 2008, Activision launched a marketing campaign for the game called Seize Control that allowed fans to vote on what the cover art of the game would look like. Fans voted, and Option 2 was decided on, which, thank God. While I'm not too big on either pieces of art, I think Option 2 is miles better than Option 1. Amazing Spider-Man 2, the MJ Cut. So Shailene Woodley filmed scenes as Mary Jane Watson for The Amazing Spider-Man 2. There were multiple scenes of her, but all of them were cut, and none of them have ever been released to the public. This is because, according to Mark Webb, there was a creative decision to streamline the story and focus on Peter and Gwen and their relationship. Despite all of her scenes being cut, she was supposed to reprise her role in The Amazing Spider-Man 3, and further installments of the Townsendverse. The Ringer. First appearing in Defenders issue 51 in June 1977, Anthony Davis was a small-time crook who created a supervillain suit and became the villain, The Ringer. He'd used disc-shaped weapons and didn't exactly do too well, as during one of his first fights, he got his teeth smashed in. This made him retire from being a criminal, and so he hired Tinkerer to build him a new set of armor. But not for him, but for him to sell for a profit. Unfortunately for him, the police and Spider-Man came to arrest Tinkerer. While trying to escape, Ringer met up with the Beetle, who put an explosive ring around Ringer's body and forced him to fight Spider-Man in order for the Beetle to gain data on Spider-Man. After that, he'd go on to become the villain, Strikeback, and eventually die in a fight with Stegron. While a really minor villain, he'd also make an appearance in another continuity, Spidey Super Stories. Appearing in Spidey Super Stories issue 51, released in December 1980, Anthony Davis in this universe was a scientist who got fired from his job. Being a mentally stable person, his response was then to become a supervillain that relied on shooting rings called the Ringer. His career wouldn't exactly last very long, as despite his throwing rings and his roller skating rings, he would eventually run out of these things, so he was arrested by Spider-Man. Remember kids, if you're going to be a supervillain, remember to bring enough gadgets. Spider-Man India. First appearing in Spider-Man India issue 1, released in January 2005, Pebit Prabhakar was a normal kid until he encountered an ancient spirit who gave him the power of a spider to battle the demons threatening India. Oh yeah, in this universe, demons get summoned to this world because his universe's Norman Osborn used an ancient amulet to summon demons to Earth. Because, you know, why not? And so Spider-Man rolls out to defeat this universe's Doc Ock, Venom, and as mentioned, Green Gobbo. Sadly for Spidey India, he hasn't really received too much spotlight since his initial miniseries. He's appeared with a bit of prominence in Spider-Verse, Web Warriors, and Spider-Geddon, but he hasn't really gotten a major solo outing since. Anyways, his powers aren't really that special. I mean, they're your standard Spider-Man powers. But what is special is his name. I'm not going to repeat it again because I can barely speak, let alone say names, but his name means Pure and Light Maker. A little nod to the fact that, well, I mean, he's a superhero. Apparently he's going to make an appearance in Across the Spider-Verse Part 1. I'm not entirely sure if that's true, but hey, here's hoping it is. Spider-Man Fake Red. Spider-Man Fake Red is a manga written from July 2019 to March 2020. In this universe, Yu Onome becomes Spider-Man after finding the Spider-Man suit in a dumpster. And so he basically dumpster dives to get it and becomes a superhero with no powers. Yeah, this entire story is basically what if Spider-Man had no actual powers, and yeah, it doesn't go too well for this dude. In fact, most of the manga is about the guy struggling to be Spider-Man, as, I mean, web swinging around with no powers, that's gonna, like, destroy your arms and stuff. In this story, he faces off against Spider-Man villains like Screwball, Mysterio, and Venom. Also, there's hologram versions of the Sinister Six towards the end of it. This manga received a pretty positive reception, but I guess didn't do too well in sales, as it was cancelled less than a year after its launch. Now, I personally haven't read Fake Red yet, but from what I've seen, fans seem to really like it. So while it has been cancelled and we won't probably get a continuation of it anytime soon, at least it will remain a cult classic among Spider-Man fans. Doc Ock's Stark Arms. One of the original ideas for Spider-Man 2 was that Tony Stark was going to be the true creator of Doc Ock's tentacles, meaning that they'd be made from Stark Tech. This idea made it into a very early draft of the script, but it didn't happen, not because Sam Raimi didn't want it to, but because it was legally not possible, as Marvel wouldn't allow Sony to use the name Tony Stark in their film. But Sony did have the rights to Doctor Strange, so they ended up referencing him. Though it's funny because less than a year after Spider-Man 2 came out in April 2005, Marvel Studios purchased the rights to Doctor Strange. So if Spider-Man 2 got pushed back a year or something like that, that little reference probably would have had to have been removed. Spider-Man joins the X-Men. After Wolverine died, don't worry, he's okay again. Insert Goliath joke here. Spider-Man honored a request for him to become a teacher at the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning, which basically meant that Spider-Man finally became an official X-Men member. This lasted only for a little bit, as Spidey taught students while also investigating the school for a potential traitor. This all happened in the 6-issue miniseries Spider-Man and the X-Men, which, yes, is where the turn people to dinosaur scene is from. Though technically this wouldn't be the first time Spider-Man's been part of the X-Men. For example, in the video game X-Men Mutant Academy 2, Spider-Man is part of the X-Men's roster. I mean, technically you could, say he's just a guest fighter, but, whatever. He's there. I thought I'd mention it. Anyways, while I doubt it, maybe Spider-Man and the X-Men is just a giant reference to how fans have debated for years why Spider-Man wasn't part of the X-Men. I mean, because, since he's technically a mutant. I'm sure whichever side you're on, you'll make a great argument about it in the comments below. The Doppelganger. First appearing in Infinity War issue 1 in April 1992, Doppelganger was a mindless clone of Spider-Man. Well, they say duplicate, but I mean, isn't that the same thing as a clone? Anyways, while he was originally created in Infinity War, he was killed fairly quickly by Hobgoblin. But he was brought back to life thanks to Demogoblin, and served as his pet. His semi-sentient, 6-armed clone of his arch-nemesis, Pet. I was gonna say that's really evil, but I mean, look at Demogoblin. I think he knows it's evil. Anyways, after that, Doppelganger has had a very weird run throughout the comics. He's not really a villain. I mean, yeah, he's a bad guy, but he's more just a henchman, because he seems to always be fighting under somebody, whether it be his adopted mom Shriek, Carnage, Demogoblin, etc. He was also part of the Spider Army during the Spider-Verse, so I guess he's not, fully evil? Yeah, he's not really, a big villain or even a big player in Spider-Man lore, despite his look being pretty marketable. He's pretty much just a remnant of Infinity War that just never really went away. Honestly, from the very limited amount of stuff I've read of Doppelganger, it seems like writers just kind of bring him back because they're like, alright guys, let's bring this character back because we need a really cool variant cover this month. And that's kind of it, really. I think there's stuff you could actually do with him. Maybe he becomes, more sentient or something. He has, a change of heart, or... I don't know. As of right now, it doesn't really seem like anyone's too interested in giving this 6-armed cameo anything to do. Vulture in Spider-Man 3. In 2018, Thomas Hayden Church, who played Sandman in Spider-Man 3 and No Way Home, revealed in an interview that originally Spider-Man 3 was going to have Vulture in it. However, this idea didn't last very long, as quite early into production, Vulture was written out of the film, with the intention of him being introduced in Spider-Man 4. And so the film carried on being a Spider-Man vs. Sandman-centric film. Until Sony forced Sam Raimi to introduce Venom into the film, which, well, we know how that turned out. Steel Spider. First appearing in Peter Parker The Spectacular Spider-Man issue 72, released in November of 1982, Oliver Osnick was a guy who just loved Doc Ock, and so he became the villain Kid Ock, because that's a good name, and tried to rob a toy store, though he failed and Spider-Man caught him and gave him a very stern talking to, dude, stop doing, what's wrong with you? Because of this, he changed his tune and became a superhero named Spider-Kid. Dude is not very good with the names, I see, but was a failure as a superhero as well. He was basically a comic relief villain or problem of the month that Peter had to deal with. However, that all changed in Spider-Man Unlimited issue 5, released in May 1994, where he became the Steel Spider, after his girlfriend was attacked by some muggers. Using his new gadgets, like pepper spray blasters and a gauntlet with a grappling hook, he went around and brutally beat the hell out of the muggers, but would quickly retire from being Steel Spider after finally realizing that he never wanted to be a vigilante. But then, little over a decade later, after the events of Civil War, he took up the mantle of Steel Spider again, after being inspired by Spider-Man unmasking himself. This did not end well for him, as he was then hunted down by the Thunderbolts because he refused to unmask himself. This resulted in him battling the Thunderbolts, which led to his left arm being bitten off by Venom Scorpion, and was then thrown into the Negative Zone prison. And that's where his story ends. No, really, he's never been released. The last we hear about him is during the Heroic Age storyline, where Captain America places his incarceration under reconsideration, but this really sad end hasn't stopped Steel Spider from appearing in cartoons. He's gone on to appear in Ultimate Spider-Man and Marvel's Spider-Man. He's also served as an inspiration for Spider-Man with Doc Ock tentacles in the '94 Spider-Man series, which also served as inspiration for Spider-Verse, so in a weird way, Steel Spider had a hand in making Spider-Verse a thing. Spider-Man. First appearing in What If issue 23, released in July of 1980, Spider-Man is the answer to the age-old question, what if Aunt May was bitten by the radioactive spider? This only happens because Peter forgot his lunch, and so she rushes over to the science center to give it to him. But then, the spider bites her. Now, originally she would use her newfound powers exclusively for doing tricks and stunts to earn money for her family. But she eventually becomes a superhero after the menacing Leapfrog makes his debut. She'd remain an obscure character for decades until the Spider-Verse event brought her and her universe's Peter and Ben back. After this, she'd appeared in Spider-Geddon, and a storyline where she had to fight a Carnage version of herself, that I talked about in the last Iceberg. Also, Spider-Man is currently the adopted mother of the Inheritors, the villains of Spider-Geddon, after the Spider-Man army transferred their consciousness to the bodies of infants. Doc Ock controls the Avengers. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 686, released in May 2012, Doc Ock is able to mind control the Avengers using his Octobots. Together, they're the Sinister Six, which means, yes, technically, Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, Hawkeye, Spider-Woman, and Red Hulk have all been members of the Sinister Six. Though Thor wasn't actually powered up when he was part of the Sinister Six, as when Doc Ock took control of him, he suddenly lost the ability to use and hold his hammer, so, all the lightning powers he can't use. The only thing left to mention is how Mysterio was one of the people who helped Spider-Man free the Avengers from Doc Ock's control. Scrapped Spider-Verse cameos. So seeing Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Tom Holland all chilling out together in No Way Home was pretty cool. Well, this crossover was actually meant to happen a couple years prior in animation. Originally, Into the Spider-Verse was going to have the 3 live-action Spideys make cameo appearances in the film. The idea was pitched to Sony, but Sony were like, no, as they felt it was too soon. Now I'm willing to bet that all 3 of them will make an appearance in Across the Spider-Verse Part 1 or Part 2 in some capacity after the insane success of No Way Home. Lightsaber Duel. So in Spidey Super Stories issue 31, released in November of 1977, Spider-Man has a lightsaber duel with Dr. Doom. In this story, after meeting up with Sam the Sesame Street robot, Spider-Man is thrown into an intergalactic war with Dr. Doom, Moondragon, and a bunch of other characters. So Spider-Man swings into action to defeat Dr. Doom and his Star Jaws, a obvious Death Star reference that can destroy planets by just flat out eating them. Honestly, not gonna lie, a giant machine the size of a planet that literally eats planets is probably one of the scariest things Spider-Man's had to face off against ever. After disguising himself to infiltrate the Star Jaws, Spider-Man saves Moondragon and has that lightsaber duel I mentioned earlier. Then they all escape and head over to the Pentagon to form a plan that involves the Star Jaws eating a fake planet filled with TNT. The plan works and Spider-Man has saved the day. Now, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, this was a big parody of A New Hope. But still, the fact that Spider-Man in some continuity destroyed the Death Star with teeth is pretty wild. Secret Defenders. This is another team that Spider-Man was a part of for a bit. Secret Defenders was the successor to The Defenders, led by Doctor Strange, It included members like Hulk, Silver Surfer, Spider-Man, Punisher, Wolverine, Deadpool, Scarlet Witch, War Machine, Ghost Rider, Drax, Iceman, Nova, etc. So yeah, there really wasn't like a theme to this group. They just kind of like looked at the Marvel Universe and were like, alright, let's throw this guy in, throw that guy in, alright, we're good. During his time with the Secret Defenders, which I might add wasn't very long, the old webhead fought demons, got trapped in the Death Dimension, fought the Fantastic Four, chased down the Human Torch with the help of Hulk, Wolverine, Ghost Rider, and that's it. You see, the thing about the Secret Defenders is that while Spider-Man, Deadpool, Ghost Rider, Nova, etc., were all technically Secret Defenders, they're not actually on the same team, except for that one time where Spider-Man and Ghost Rider were the same team. You see, after every mission the Secret Defenders go on, besides Strange, every member is swapped out with a new member. This was because Strange would only take members that he needed for a certain mission. How did he do this? Via tarot cards. So yeah, because of some tarot cards, Strange decided to take Spider-Man to the Death Dimension. Mayday Parker. First appearing in What If issue 105, released in February of 1998, Mayday Parker has gone from a random What If character to one of the most popular alternate universe Spider-Man ever. She comes from Earth 982 and is the daughter of Peter Parker and Mary Jane, but was kept from knowing about Peter's old life as Spider-Man, as her parents just didn't want her to know about all that stuff. Also, they were really hoping Mayday wouldn't develop powers. But I mean, like, she's the daughter of Spider-Man, so of course she's gonna have powers. So yeah, around the age of 15, she develops her powers and becomes Spider-Girl. As Spider-Girl, and later Spider-Woman, she has all the abilities that Spider-Man has, except that she has a more advanced version of the Spider-Sense, at the cost of her being less strong than her father. Now you might be wondering if she's a mutant, because, I mean, technically she would be, right? Well, she's not. You see, she wasn't born with these powers, she inherited them from her father and was bred true. Whatever the hell that means, bred true. Anyways, Mayday is quite notable as her original comic run was the longest running superhero comic with a female lead that Marvel had ever created, at 102 issues. Don't know if that's true anymore, but it was for a time. As for her villains, she's fought Green Goblin, who in this universe is named Normie Osborn. What a tragic life. She also has a clone of her named April Parker, who went on to become the villain Mayhem. Why did she have a clone? Because of the Spider-Man comic, of course. Everyone gets cloned. And Mayday has also existed in the mainline Marvel continuity. Oh, right. It was kind of part of it for a bit. Anyways, she's also appeared in several crossover stories like Spider-Verse and Spider-Geddon, along with various games like Marvel Avengers Alliance, Shared Dimensions as a cameo, and a skit in Marvel Ultimate Alliance. She even served as inspiration for Petra Parker at Ultimate Spider-Man. Spider-Wolf. Only appearing in Amazing Spider-Man issue 11, released in December 2014, Spider-Wolf is... well, he's dead. But he's basically Spider-Man if Peter became a werewolf as well. And that's it. No, like no joke, this dude just shows up and gets killed in a panel. I only included him in this Iceberg because werewolf Spider-Man is pretty crazy. I wish we got a story with him, but oh well, I guess. I should also mention that there is another Spider-Wolf in Ultimate Spider-Man, though he's called Wolf Spider and he's not a werewolf. He's yet again another evil version of Spider-Man who murdered his universe's Miles Morales. Earth X. Written by Jim Krueger and Alex Ross, Earth X is a limited comic series released from 1999 to 2000 and received 3 sequels: Universe X from 2000 to 2001, Paradise X from 2002 to 2003, and Marvel's X in 2020. In this universe, Black Bolt and the Inhumans do a little bit of trolling as they release a mutagenic mist into Earth's atmosphere in order to mutate everyone on the planet so that Inhumans wouldn't be persecuted anymore. This does end up mutating the world's population, but it also results in like a bunch of Marvel characters dying for a variety of different reasons. But hey, you came to this Iceberg to learn about Spider-Man stuff, so let's talk about this universe's Spider-Man. Well, first, I want to introduce this universe's Norman Osborn, who became this universe's US president, after creating a parasitical collective alien hive mind creature that mind controls people. So, you know, a pretty good candidate for president. Anyway, so this universe's Peter Parker was actually married before the mutant apocalypse, but his wife Mary Jane died before the apocalypse due to cancer. Also, Norman Osborn doxed Spider-Man so the world knows he's Peter Parker, and his daughter is bonded with the Venom symbiote. So, yeah, his life isn't really going very well at the moment. This resulted in him retiring from being Spider-Man for quite a while, leading Peter to get really out of shape, but was eventually called back into doing superhero stuff after his daughter was mind-controlled by the villain Skull. After this, Peter joins the NYPD, and together with Luke Cage, they keep New York safe. Oh, and later down the line, Peter and his daughter would get caught up in an illusionary world where she finds out that Peter would rather have lived in a world where he married Gwen Stacy and that his daughter never existed, so that all of his personal tragedies would never have happened. And she wasn't very happy with that, so she beat the crap out of Peter until he apologized. Captain America becomes the Spider King. So during the Spider Island event, Steve Rogers, aka Captain America, was captured by the Jackal, who went on to mutate Captain America into a giant spider named the Spider King. Now as the Spider King, Steve was impregnated with thousands of spider eggs in order to spread a virus that gave everyone in New York City Spider-Man-like powers. There's even a scene in which Spider King vomits up mutant spiders to escape captivity, because that's just one of his powers, I guess. How horrible. Evil, in fact, actually. Captain America was eventually cured of this mutation thanks to the efforts of Agent Venom, only after capturing him and placing him in a military facility until a cure could be found, but hey, I guarantee you Captain America every single night probably has nightmares about vomiting up spiders. Because, like, again, I need to specify this. This was a power he had. Captain America at one point superpower was that he could vomit up spiders. Spider Island was a very interesting book. Pestilence. Only appearing in Cable and Deadpool issue 15, released in May 2005, this universe's Spider-Man was chosen by Apocalypse to be one of his horsemen, and so Apocalypse turned Peter into the horrid abomination called Pestilence. As Pestilence, his powers are pretty much the same as normal Spider-Man. It's just that he has multiple arms now, and he just loves to kill, so he's not holding back any punches. He also likes to suck the bone marrow from people while they're alive, so, you know, there's that too, I guess. Surprisingly, this version of Spider-Man has never returned, like, ever, in any, like, multiverse thing. Though there was another alternate universe Spider-Man who was also mutated by Apocalypse and was also named Pestilence. This version of the character first appeared in Avengers issue 2, released in June 2010, but this was an entirely different character. It was not related to the one in Cable and Deadpool at all. This version of the character was actually brought into the mainline universe for a brief period, after a time stream malfunction caused by Kang.
Don't miss out on the action. We'll be right back to Spider-Man Maximum Venom on Disney XD.
Cheese it. Get your own box. And catch Spider-Man 2 in theaters June 30th.
Let's get back to the action. Spider-Man Maximum Venom is back on Disney XD.
Marvel Creativity Center. Marvel Creativity Center is a video game released in 1996 for PC, and it's basically a game that teaches kids how to create comics, pogs, trading cards, and covers, the quote-unquote Marvel way, with Stan Lee and Spider-Man acting as teachers. There's also a radio that you can listen to music with, or listen to Robot Rampage updates, in which radio hosts talk about sightings of Marvel heroes battling robots. Surprisingly, there is a plot to this game. The plot is about how Marvel Studios is being messed with by a supervillain who's broken contact with all the Marvel artists and writers, which leaves Stan Lee asking random children to make comics in order to figure out who this mysterious villain is. In case you're wondering who it is, it's Machine Smith. It's quite the obscure little relic from the early days of Spidey video games. Cosmic Spider-Man. In Spectacular Spider-Man issue 158, released in December of 1989, Spider-Man gets possessed by the powers of Captain Universe, in order for him to battle the Tri-Sentinel. a jacked-up Sentinel created by Loki to kill Spider-Man, because Loki's team of villains, including Kingpin, Wizard, Doctor Doom, Magneto, the Mandarin, and Red Skull, somehow together weren't able to defeat Spider-Man. Anyways, he was given the powers of Captain Universe by accident, as he had gotten them while helping a friend do an experiment to tap into a mysterious, extra-dimensional power source. This power source upgraded his already superhuman speed and strength, gave him the ability to fly, gave him super hearing, and the power to turn his webs into adamantium and fire energy blasts from his hands. Basically, he was super OP. He would end up losing these powers shortly after defeating the Tri-Sentinel, and that was that. Until, in Amazing Spider-Man issue 9, released in November of 2014, an alternate universe Peter Parker was introduced from Earth 13, who kept the powers of Captain Universe, and thus became almost godlike. Though, because his powers stem from pure life force, when the villain Solus appeared, who, feasts on pure life force, Cosmic Spider-Man kinda bit the dust very quickly. Doc Ock and cocaine. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 339, released in July 1990, Doc Ock begins a new sinister plan to spread a poison he created around the world that'd cause all cocaine addicts to convulse when using the drug. He'd then offer a cure to the poison to the addicts for an insanely high price. He wanted to do all this so that he would get enough funds to take over the world. So he'd basically run the entire cocaine market. Now, the rest of the Sinister Six who he was working with at the time didn't know about this, and they weren't very happy with this plan. So they tried to kill Doc Ock. But Ock was able to defeat all 5 of them and escape. Just when it seemed like Doc Ock's plan was going to work, Spider-Man then called in Thor to help him, and, Thor just kind of ends the plan instantly because he's a literal god of thunder. Web of Shadows alternate costumes. Web of Shadows is a very controversial Spider-Man game, with a ton of people loving it, while a lot of other people think it's overrated as hell. But the one thing that pretty much everyone agrees upon is that the game should have alternate costumes, but it doesn't. Yes, there's the black suit, but come on, you get what I mean by alternate costumes. Well, unknown to most people, Web of Shadows does have alternate costumes. Just in the Wii port of the game, which is basically the same game as the PC 360 and PS3 versions, just, graphically scaled down a lot. And so the Wii version of Web of Shadows includes the skins Ben Reilly, Spider Carnage, Cosmic Spider-Man, the Spider Armor, Iron Spider, and 2099. Original Spider-Man 3 plans. I've already talked about Spider-Man 3's delayed scenes in the last Iceberg, and I mentioned the original Vulture idea in this one, but there's still more stuff scrapped from Spider-Man 3. For instance, Venom was originally going to be mostly animatronic, not CG. There are production stills and other behind-the-scenes photos of the animatronic, and it looked pretty awesome. It sadly didn't work too well while filming, so it was scrapped. Though I'm pretty sure you can still see it in, I think, a teaser trailer for Spider-Man 3. Also, Venom's death was going to actually be a lot more brutal. Eddie wouldn't have been pulled out of Venom. It was going to be revealed that Venom had literally eaten Eddie, with Peter seeing Eddie's venomified skull as he blew up. Also, the black suit was originally going to be extremely comic accurate in the film, with an entire suit being made, but it didn't end up being used. Finally, there's also this black suit design that's more of a purple suit. I'm not super big on it, but it'd be a neat skin in Spider-Man 2, along with the Raimi black suit. Come on, Insomniac, don't let us down. Jack-O-Lantern. First appearing in Captain America issue 396, released in January 1992, Stephen Levins was your average mercenary who sold their soul to the devil for power. He's got super strength, the ability to create and throw fire, and a weird ability where if he looks at someone in the eyes and then screams, that person he's looking at chokes to death. He didn't really do too much in his first couple appearances outside of fighting Captain America and Spider-Man. It wasn't until Civil War issue 5, released in November of 2006, that he got to do anything of note. That is, attacking Spider-Man in the sewers, only to get shot through the head by Punisher. But then, Satan himself decided to possess Stephen Levin's corpse in Ghost Rider issue 8, released in February 2007. But that didn't last too long, as Ghost Rider exorcised his body by ripping out Levin's heart, setting it on fire, and then putting it back in his body. Basically a Mortal Kombat fatality. But then, in Prowler issue 1, released in October 2016, Levins was cloned by Jackal and had his soul transferred into his clone body. He'd then go on to create a group of henchmen called the Jack-O-Lanterns, and that's kind of it. You know, for someone who's not very important to the Marvel Universe, he's got a hell of a story. But we're not done yet. You see, he wasn't the first Jack-o'-lantern. That was Jason McIndell Jr., aka the Hobgoblin. Originally a Machine Man in issue 19, released in November of 1980, he went by the name Jack-o'-lantern, 7 years before becoming Hobgoblin. He took up the mantle of Jack-o'-lantern after working as a CIA field agent. When he was eventually fired from that job for being too brutal, which, yeah, the CIA wouldn't fire you for that, he became a mercenary and created a weird-looking glider and costume. So there's been, 2 Jack-o'-lanterns, right? No. Oh god, I wish. There's also Maguire Beck, cousin of Mysterio, and Daniel Beckart, who worked together as Mad Jack, the new Jack-o'-lantern. They first showed up as Jack-o'-lantern in Spectacular Spider-Man issue 241 in December of 1996. Though eventually Beckart would return to being Mysterio, while Beck continued being Jack-o'-lantern until she was eventually arrested. They didn't really appear too much, there's not a lot of notable things that happened with them. There was also a currently unknown individual who took up the mantle of Jack-o'-lantern, who first appeared in Secret War issue 1, released in February 2004. Not much else is known about him outside the fact that he got his equipment from the Tinkerer, and he claimed to be Jason McIndell Jr., but wasn't. And we're not done yet. In Dark Reign Made Men issue 1, released in September 2009, Stephen Levin's brother took up the mantle of Jack-o'-lantern after murdering the 15-year-old daughter of his neighbor and drinking her blood as part of a deal he made with Satan to become the new Jack-o'-lantern. And we're still not done. Then there's Jack, who first appeared in Venom issue 1, released in March 2011, who became a supervillain after being kidnapped at a young age and just deciding, this dude who kidnapped me, he's my true father. He then went back to his parents and murdered them. After that, he became an assassin who would scoop the brains out of his victims and place candles inside them, and claimed that he went and killed everyone who ever called themselves Jack-o'-lantern. So all those dudes I talked about before, they're dead. Except for Jason McIndell Jr., who's not dead, so maybe they're all still alive and he was just lying? I have no idea. Anyways, this Jack-o'-lantern was a villain of Venom, and had a wide variety of weapons, like acid candy, robotic devil dolls that are designed to psychologically destroy people, and of course, pumpkin bombs. And finally, we have some rando with no name who found the Jack-o'-lantern costume, put it on, and became a villain. He first appeared in Venom issue 1, released in May 2018, and got one of his eyes gouged out by Venom. Months later, he got actual powers from a witch, tried to kill Venom, but failed. And all those guys are just the main timeline Jack-o'-lanterns. There's a whole bunch of alternate universe Jack-o'-lanterns, but I'm not talking about all of them. Here's an image of all of them, alright? Peter hits a pregnant Mary Jane. So in Spectacular Spider-Man issue 226, released in July 1995, it's the middle of the Clone Saga, and Peter and Ben Reilly do some tests to figure out who's the real Peter Parker. The test results come in, and Peter is labeled as the clone, while Ben is labeled as the real Peter. Peter isn't exactly very thrilled about this, understandably so he tries to beat the truth out of Ben. It's a brutal beating that Mary Jane, who's pregnant at the time, watches. Eventually, she steps in and tries to stop Peter because he might accidentally kill Ben. In a deranged state, Peter punches Mary Jane into a wall out of anger. He then almost immediately realizes what he's done, and instead of being like, "I'm sorry," just goes, "My God, what have I done?" and runs away. But I guess it doesn't really matter because Mary Jane instantly forgives him, so maybe this served as inspiration for Peter hitting Mary Jane in Spider-Man 3? Though I don't know about that, as Sam Raimi has said before, he's not too knowledgeable about 90s Spider-Man stuff, so maybe not. Anyways, Peter punched his pregnant wife. But don't worry, she didn't miscarry. She did give birth to the kid, but the kid was instantly abducted and the plotline was never resolved, so canceled Kevin Smith comic. Spider-Man Black Cat, The Evil That Men Do, was a 6-issue miniseries starring, Spider-Man and my wife Black Cat, written by Kevin Smith, released from August 2002 to March 2006. Yeah, the release between issues was very spaced out. Now, why am I calling this comic canceled if it was fully released? Well, I'm not. You see, originally, this miniseries was meant to lead into the main Amazing Spider-Man comic run, where Kevin Smith was going to take over as the main writer. However, this 6-issue miniseries took 4 years to release every issue, and so Kevin Smith was fired from the feature position, so that Kevin Smith run of Amazing Spider-Man was cancelled. Also, because he took so long to complete the issues, he was only paid for his writing after all 6 issues had been released, because of some weird Marvel payment system. So that's pretty crappy of them. Venom 2099. First appearing in Punisher 2099 issue 1, released in December of 1992, Cron Stone is the older half-brother to Miguel O'Hara, aka Spider-Man 2099, and is what you'd call an asshole. He takes pleasure in people's pain, and was the one who had Punisher 2099's family murdered. Shortly after that, he'd become Venom in Spider-Man 2099 issue 35, released in July 1995. This was because after Punisher 2099 found him and, did some Punisher stuff to him, Cron just so happened to find a symbiote in the sewers. And so now as Venom, Cron becomes a supervillain and goes after Spider-Man, right after he murders Miguel's ex-girlfriend, though he's eventually beaten and locked away. His powers differ from the main universe's Venom, as he now has acidic blood and saliva, which is a direct reference to the Xenomorph, the Aliens franchise. This was left over from concept art to Venom 2099, in which he was directly based on a Xenomorph. And for a while, Venom 2099 was forgotten about, until December 2019 in Venom 2099, when it made its comeback with a new host, Elia Bell. Elia Bell's version of Venom is much more heroic. She got the symbiotes while undergoing an experimental treatment to fix her left arm, as it was badly burned in a crash when she was a kid. Upon discovering Venom in her, she allowed it to stay with her with the condition that they become superheroes. The Amazing Shutterbug. Heroes Reborn was an event in 2021 where Marvel did a big what-if scenario. That scenario being, what if the Marvel Universe is more like the DC what if the Marvel Universe didn't have the Avengers? It lasted for 8 main issues and had 10 tie-in issues to expand the universe. The one I'll be focusing on is Heroes Reborn Peter Parker, the Amazing Shutterbug, though there were also issues that dealt with Spider-Gwen and Miles Morales. In this universe, Flash Thompson pushes Peter to the ground and kills the spider before it can give Peter his powers, and so Peter just lives the rest of his life being normal. Except actually that's not true, as he gets bitten by a really strange creature that turns him into a spider-like being. So he tries to endgame himself, but fails and instantly breaks all of his limbs. I should also mention here that by this point in time, he was basically the Jimmy Olsen to Hyperion's Superman, which, Hyperion's in this, and he's this universe's Superman. After this little endgame attempt, Peter's transformation went away, so, hey, he's no longer a horrible mutation. Later, he tagged along with some S.H.I.E.L.D. agents to the White House to investigate an artifact called Pandemium Cube. But President Phil Coulson, yes, he's president in this universe, was then like, alright guys, thanks for coming to investigate, but I gotta keep this thing a secret, so I'm gonna kill you all. And that's how Peter's story ends. His existence in this universe is kinda sad. Oh, and I forgot to mention, Aunt May died in this universe a while ago, thanks to Hyperion hurling a sign at her while fighting a villain, Blood Spider. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man issue 367, released in August of 1992, Blood Spider, aka Michael Bingham, was a supervillain hired by Taskmaster to mimic Spider-Man in a plot to kill the wall-crawling menace. He was trained by Taskmaster himself to perfectly match Spider-Man's fighting style, and even had his own web shooters that came out of a tube connected to a backpack he wore. He also might have super strength, or at least a very high pain tolerance, and that's kind of it. He's appeared a handful of times since his original outing, but he's never been like a mainstay villain or a character that's gotten really any interesting story to him. There is another Blood Spider though, that's actually just Peter Parker from another universe in Ultimate Spider-Man. He was his universe's last hero after his world was consumed by vampires. He also made a cameo in Spider-Geddon, so that's neat. The Michael Bingham version of Blood Spider has also appeared in Spider-Man Unlimited, with 2 different costumes. Reason for being a PlayStation exclusive. So pretty much everyone's annoyed that Spider-Man is a PlayStation 4 exclusive character in Square Enix's Avengers. I thought the era of console exclusive DLC was over, but I guess not. And so a lot of people began wondering, why is he a PlayStation exclusive? Was it because of Insomniac's Spider-Man games? Well, no, it can't be that, because Spider-Man shows up in Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3, which was a Nintendo Switch exclusive. It even had Spider-Man and Doc Ock's voice actors from the game reprise their roles. There are 2 theories as to why he became a PlayStation exclusive. The first is the official story. In 2020, it was revealed by a developer that this is because of a special relationship between Sony and Disney, with the other explanation being a bit of a conspiracy theory that I personally don't buy and think it's a little silly. But people claim that Sony gave Square Enix Insomniac's coding for Spider-Man's web slinging, in exchange for the character to be a console exclusive. I don't buy this though at all, as I mentioned before. It's more than likely he's just exclusive because of some deal between Sony and Disney. The Case of the Sinister Speller. The Case of the Sinister Speller is a Leapstar video game released in 2005. It's an action-packed story about Spider-Man coming face-to-face with his most challenging foe, the Sinister Speller. In his mission to stop the Sinister Speller from rearranging letters across the city, he must spell and take photos. Now, am I really going to make fun of a video game made for literal babies? Yes, I am.
Beg, you just morphed the word. Presto, changeo, rearrangeo.
By the end of his word-spelling adventure, it turns out that this Sinister Speller is actually the Green Goblin, who's being held by a fake Spider-Man played by the Chameleon. Thankfully for the residents of New York City, Spider-Man's able to stop their awful spelling. Jokes aside, the game was created to help teach kids how to spell and read, so I guess it does its job fine. Maybe I should play this. Help me pronounce things better.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can. Spins a web any size, Tetris speed, just like Buzz. Look out, here comes the Spider-Man. Is he strong? Listen, bud, he's got radioactive blood. Can he swing from a thread? Take a look overhead. Look out, here comes the Spider-Man. In the chill of night, at the scene of a crime, like a streak of light, he arrives just in time. Spider-Man, Spider-Man, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Wealth and fame, he's ignored. Action is his reward to him. Life is a great big bang up. Wherever there's a hang up, you'll find a Spider-Man.
Shothra. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man issue 46, released in November 2002, Shothra, aka the Spider-Wasp, is quite the strange modern Spider-Man villain. She's a being from the astral plane, and tried to kill Spider-Man in the same way a Spider-Wasp tries to kill spiders. So yes, she paralyzed him and tried to feed him to her children, right after pretending to be an old flame from Spider-Man's past, going on TV, and give humiliating facts about the wall crawler. You know, what Spider-Wasps do in real life. She's got an insane amount of powers, from superhuman speed, superhuman strength, shape-shifting, flight, teleportation, enhanced healing, and even has some claws and stingers that can cut through bone like butter and are coated in a paralyzing agent. Ultimately, she'd be defeated by Spidey, who reminds her that the food chain can run in both directions. Maybe. I've actually never seen a spider take out a Spider-Wasp, so I have no idea. She wouldn't show up again until Scarlet Spider issue 24, November 2013, where she would try to do the same thing to Kane Parker. But this time, she had a bit of fun with him as she slept with him while pretending to be Kane's girlfriend, before revealing her true form. And then Kane killed her. Well, okay, we don't know that he killed her, but I mean, we never actually find out what happens to Shothra at the end of this, and she hasn't been seen since, so... Spider-Man, Rock Reflections of a Superhero. In 1975, a rock album titled Spider-Man Rock Reflections of a Superhero was released under Lifesong Records. It featured a variety of songs that weren't always rock, and had a narration from Stan Lee. It's an extremely over-the-top album that has songs like High Wire, Gwendolyn, A Soldier Starts to Bleed, Peter Stays and Spider-Man Goes, Square Boy, Time Will Show Me the Way, Count on Me, and No One's Got a Crush on Peter. That last one being a complete lie, because Peter Parker seems to have like a million love interests, or at least a million different women in his life who are very clearly into him. There's also a song in this where Doc Ock threatens to turn Thor and Black Panther into go-go dancers, so it's a full package. Sum Sum. First appearing in Marvel Sum Sum issue 1, released in August of 2016, the Sum Sum Spider-Man is a promotion character introduced in the comics as a way to promote the Disney Sum Sum line of stuffed plushies. In the comic, this Sum Sum found Spider-Man inspiring, so he adapted himself to look like Spider-Man and have his abilities. It was then manipulated by the looter to then turn into Ultron and help him rob banks. During this robbery, Sum Sum betrayed the looter and then fought the Avengers, though he was eventually convinced to revert back to being a hero, and now lives in a renovated toy store with the rest of his sentient Sum Sum brothers. After that, it didn't really do too much outside of like a cameo or two. Wait, they're pronounced Tsum Tsum? Then what's the T for? Mindworm. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man issue 138, released in August of 1974, William Turner, aka Mindworm, was a supervillain who was born with the ability to drain the mental energy from people. He could also lift things with his mind, invade dreams, and read minds, but draining mental energy from people, that was his main hobby. At a young age, he accidentally killed his mother with his mental energy draining ability, which then caused his father to run in front of a car and, die. So this did well for his mental health. When he got older, he'd go on to live off the emotions of his neighbors. He wouldn't kill them, he'd just take their mental energy from them just until they're about to die, and then he'd let them recharge. Now, because of his strong mind, Spider-Man was immune to his power, and was able to stop him and turn him into the police. While in prison, Mindworm would then realize that he only did these criminal actions out of guilt over his involvement in his parents' deaths. And so he stopped being a criminal and attempted to reform himself, only for him to then be exploited by criminals, which resulted in him being arrested again, and when he was released again, he became homeless, and refused to use his powers to hurt anyone, so when a street gang went up to murder him, he didn't fight back, and allowed the street gang to murder him in Spectacular Spider-Man issue 22, released in February 2005. I don't really have a joke here, that's just a really sad ending. Italian Spider-Man. Italian Spider-Man is a comedy series released in 2007 on YouTube. It ran for 10 episodes and pretended it was a lost Italian film, but in reality it was just a parody of foreign versions of superhero films in the 70s and 80s, with films like the 1987 Superman film, the 3 Fantastic Supermen, the Batwoman, which I talked about in my first Batman Iceberg, and 3 Dev Adam, which I'll talk about a bit later. It also takes influence from foreign bootleg films like Turkish Star Wars and Turkish Rambo. Directed by Dario Russo and made in Australia, the plot of this series is pretty wild, as Italian Spider-Man is given an asteroid made of a substance that can create duplicate beings. He's tasked with defending this asteroid from the supervillain Captain Maximum, and the two engage in fistfights, kaiju fights, and a surfing battle. I don't want to spoil too much of the series, as it's actually available for free on YouTube, so go and watch it. Trust me, you won't regret it. The Answer. First appearing in Peter Parker The Spectacular Spider-Man issue 91, released in March 1984, Aaron Nicholson, aka The Answer, was a supervillain who gained his abilities after undergoing an experiment. So what are these powers? Well, he gained the ability to come up with whatever power was necessary to resolve a given situation. So basically, if there was a cliff, he'd temporarily be able to fly. If there was a fire, he'd be able to manipulate water for a bit to put it out, etc. For a period of time, he worked under Kingpin and tried to take down Spider-Man and Black Cat. Later, he tried to capture Dagger, as he believed that the energy manipulated from her might be able to revive Vanessa, Kingpin's wife. He did this to try to make up for his constant failures with Spider-Man and Black Cat. His plan backfired and killed him. Though, because of his powers to gain abilities to solve situations, he actually didn't die, and survived as a being of pure energy. He'd go on to get Doc Ock to restore him to his physical form, only to then be arrested shortly afterwards. The last thing of note he did was when he was confronted by Toxin, and when asked by Toxin, how do I get rid of the symbiote, as I can't keep it from misbehaving, and it's making me do awful things, The Answer just responded, you should probably just, endgame yourself, dude. To which Toxin tried, but failed, as the Toxin symbiote saved him. So yeah, The Answer tried to get some dude to, off himself. J.J. Abrams' Spider-Man comic. Alright, so Spider-Man Bloodline. This is an alternate universe miniseries written by J.J. Abrams and Henry Abrams. Well, okay, mainly just Henry Abrams. From what we know, J.J. Abrams just kind of put his name on it and let his son take the wheel. Anyways, this series is about how Ben Parker II, the son of Peter Parker and Mary Jane, became Spider-Man, after a tragedy involving the villain Cadaverous, who might I add kinda looks like a supervillain version of a hunter from Halo. Peter abandons his son and being Spider-Man to become a war photographer. This is because he thinks he's ill-equipped to be a parent. Eventually, Ben would develop his powers and find Peter's Spider-Man suit in the attic. And so Ben becomes the new Spider-Man. This comic is notable because people don't really care for it. Now, I personally haven't read it myself, so I have no opinion on it, but yeah, this comic is far from beloved. Now, why is the reception of this comic so bad? Well, it's mainly because people think that Peter Parker is treated kinda weird. In the story, Mary Jane supposedly dies, which causes him to become distant from his son, which leads to Peter eventually abandoning his son and having his son live with Aunt May. Which, I mean, like, if there's any character in comics who's not going to abandon his son, it would probably be Peter Parker. As for some of the new characters introduced in the comic, there's Faye Ito, aka Ben's Black Cat, and Ivan Renz, aka Keteros, who was a former Stark Industries employee who created a gene-bending device that could bring back the dead. But Tony Stark didn't want to play God, so they shut it down. This caused Ivan to go mad and become a supervillain. He also created the spider that turned Peter into Spider-Man, so there's also that. Jewish connection. Many people have claimed that Peter Parker is actually Jewish. The reason for this is because he was created by Jewish writers like Stan Lee, and oftentimes characters back then were created with heavy influence from the creators' personal lives. In fact, Stan Lee placed Peter's home in the comics in Forest Hills, a neighborhood in Queens known for its Jewish population. Andrew Garfield has also said that his Spider-Man is Jewish, stating in 2014 that, and I quote, "He ums and ahs about his future because he's neurotic. He's Jewish. It's a defining feature. I hope Jewish people don't mind the cliche because my father's Jewish. I have that in me for sure." And finally, in Into the Spider-Verse, Peter B. Parker steps on glass during his wedding, a Jewish tradition. But yeah, for the most part, Peter Parker is depicted as either a Protestant or religion isn't brought up at all. But there's definitely a lot of universes where Spider-Man is Jewish. The stolen Raimi suits. In April 2001, 4 of the suits used to film the original Spider-Man film were stolen. In response, Sony offered $25,000 for the return of the suits. This resulted in a ton of false leads that apparently led Sony across several different continents. It wasn't until 2002 when Sony would finally discover all 4 suits. Turns out, they were all stolen by a former Sony security guard named Jeffrey Glenn Gustafson. They found out that he did it because his ex-wife came forward with information. Gustafson was also in possession of a stolen Batman Forever Batsuit that was reported missing in 1996, along with a mannequin modeled after Val Kilmer. They were then also able to track down the 4th suit to a collector in Japan that he had sold it to. Gustafson was then sentenced to 9 months in jail and 5 years probation, and was forced to pay $93,000 in restitutions. Spider-Man becomes Carnage. So there's been a couple of times where Spider-Man's bonded with Carnage. In the mainline timeline, Ben Reilly bonded with Carnage in order to stop Carnage from killing anyone in Amazing Spider-Man issue 410, released in February of 1996. But it didn't last very long, as John Jameson fired off a fatal blast of microwave radiation that forced Carnage off of Ben. Then of course there's the far more iconic Spider-Carnage that originates from the 90s Spider-Man cartoon. He serves as the final villain in the show, and the reason why multiple Spider-Men across the multiverse have to team up. In this continuity, Carnage arrived via a portal and bonded to Peter, as Peter was fighting Scarlet Spider. As Spider-Carnage, Peter then decided to end all of reality, but was defeated by a team of Spider-Men, and an emotional talking to by Uncle Ben. Peter then decided to jump into an unstable portal to off himself and Carnage. So, no happy ending here for this dude.
Parker! That's the 3rd call I got about giant lizards running amok in Gramercy Park. Giant lizards! Get me photos, pronto!
Right away, Mr. Jameson. Giant lizards? They aren't paying me enough. I'll take that.
Oh, you think you're smart, buddy? Well, think again. I hit a bunch of cameras around here, and now I have an even better shot than I was planning. You punching me in the jaw and taking my camera. So thanks.
Guess I'll just have to take those cameras too.
Sweet. Just like in the movies.
What do you want from me, you freak?
Freak? I'm the freak. Have you looked in the mirror lately? Now, let's talk about how we're going to destroy the spider.
Don't miss out on the action. We'll be right back to Spider-Man Maximum Venom on Disney XD.
With IO Digital Cable Service, the action starts with the push of a button. With on-demand movies you can order instantly. Available now, on demand. Bitten by a radioactive spider, Peter Parker acquires spider-like abilities he must now use to fight evil in Spider-Man. Start your movie when you want. Even pause, rewind, and fast forward. Order new hit movies now, only with IO Digital Cable Service from Cablevision. Call to order IO today. 1-866-50-DIGITAL.
Let's get back to the action. Spider-Man Maximum Venom is back on Disney XD.
Paste Pot Pete. First appearing in Strange Tales issue 104, released in October of 1962, Peter Patrinsky was a wealthy scientist who decided to become a criminal one day because he thought it'd make him a little richer. It did not. Probably because he chose to be the supervillain Paste Pot Pete. Now, why was he called that? Because his whole thing was that he'd walk around with a bucket of glue attached to a gun that fired off the glue. So he just essentially just was a glue guy. For a while, he wasn't actually a Spider-Man villain. It was instead a villain of the Fantastic Four, most notably the Human Torch. He was even part of the Frightful Four at one point, with Sandman, Wizard, and Medusa. Anyways, the reason he's on this iceberg, despite not being a major Spider-Man rogue, is because of the comics Spider-Man Human Torch issue 1, released in March 2005. This story takes place during Spider-Man's early years, and has him confront Paste Pot Pete, only for him to then start laughing hysterically when he discovers his supervillain name was Paste Pot Pete. This interaction is pretty popular online, but what many don't realize is that this is one of the very few times Spider-Man's ever encountered Patrinsky as Paste Pot Pete, because after joining the Frightful Four, Peter changed his name to the Trapster. As part of the Frightful Four, and as the Trapster, they'd even hypnotized Spider-Man at one point into joining their team for a brief period, only for Human Torch to then break Spider-Man free. Spider-Man and Trapster have since had a very lengthy history together. It seems that when Peter changed his name from Paste Pot Pete to Trapster, he was taken far more seriously by both Marvel and Spider-Man. At least somewhat. Venom in Matrix 4. So if I told you that Tom Hardy, as Eddie Brock, appears in the background of Matrix Resurrections, you'd probably say I'm lying. But I'm not. Kind of not. You see, Venom Let There Be Carnage and The Matrix Resurrections were both filmed in San Francisco at the same time. And so it was reported that in one scene, you can actually see Tom Hardy in the background. This wasn't a planned cameo or anything, he was just in the background at that time. Kind of like how that one documentary had George Lucas randomly just walk by. Honestly, I'm not even sure if this scene made it into the actual film, because I didn't see it, because I'm not really a Matrix fan. But we know that the scene was at least filmed. Though if he is in the movie, he's not playing Eddie Brock. Though, I like to think he is. Ruins. So Marvel Ruins is basically a two-part alternate universe that tells the story of what if, when the Marvel heroes became heroes, they actually die really horrible, brutal, and graphic deaths. Like Wolverine slowly decaying to death because of the toxic adamantium bones, or Captain Marvel dying of cancer. Even the protagonist of the story, Philip Sheldon, dies of cancer at the end of the story. It's just kind of like an edgy, gross-out story that's technically listed as a parody, but I don't know, I'll be honest with you, I'm just not a fan of it. But despite me not being a fan of it, I still gotta talk about it. So, as for this universe's Peter Parker, he first appeared in the second issue of Ruins, released in September of 1995. In this universe, after he was bitten by the spider, which he had actually personally irradiated, he developed a virus causing his hair to fall out and have a full body rash. And that's basically it. He probably eventually dies. Like I said, Marvel Ruins is basically just what if Marvel was gross and sad. The only thing I like in this universe, to be honest with you, is the fact that they find Galactus floating in space dead by Mars, and like the media believes he's a god. This is like a decent setup for like a cosmic horror story or a movie. I would not be opposed to someone doing this. Arachnite. First appearing in Infinity Wars issue 3, released in September of 2018, after some wacky cosmic events caused by Gamora, a pocket dimension was created called Warp World, where a bunch of souls were merged with each other. In the case of Peter Parker, he merged with Mark Spector, Moon Knight. He became Arachnite after being killed by the Goblin by Night. Get it? Werewolf by Night, Green Goblin, whatever. Anyways, it killed Peter along with Uncle Ben and Aunt May. But right before Peter died, a spider bit him, which linked Peter to some spider totems. This gave him the powers of Spider-Man, but it also split his mind into 4 different personalities. There's the Arachnid, who acts exactly like mainline Spider-Man, all, the quips and all. The Knight, who's basically Black Suit Spider-Man, so Just that Spider-Man, but a lot meaner and has no issue just almost beating criminals to death. CEO Peter, who acts as Peter's main personality when not fighting crime. Like the name suggests, he's the CEO of Parker Industries. And finally, there's Science Peter, who's a nerdy scientist. Now, Arachnite wasn't the only hero in Warp World, and would eventually team up with other heroes to form their universe's Defenders. Peter lets a kidnapping happen. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 112, released in May 1972, Peter is extremely worried about Aunt May, as she just randomly goes missing. And so he goes after her. Searching around the city in desperation, Peter notices a mugging happen and a kidnapping happen. He does think about stopping both of these, but then he goes, in order to stop this kidnapping, I'd probably spend hours saving this guy. That's hours I could be spending searching for Aunt May. And so he just dips, and, well, I can't imagine the guy that got kidnapped had a very happy ending. I guess I can't really judge him, because there's been so many times while playing Spider-Man PS4 and Miles Morales where I've just ignored crimes in progress, so, oh well. Jose Luis Gonzalez Duran. I apologize for mispronouncing that, because I know for a fact I did, but in 1972, Marvel let a Mexican publisher release original Spider-Man comics that answer the age-old question, what if Gwen Stacy never died? This run of comics went on for roughly 60 or so issues. It even had Peter and Gwen getting married. This run of comics is well known online for a piece of kinda misinformation. You see, one of the artists who worked on this comic was named Jose Luis Gonzalez Duran, and people claim that he drew Gwen Stacy with a very thick ass, basically. However, this isn't actually, well, exactly true. So while this comics did have a very big obsession with Gwen Stacy's behind, Jose wasn't responsible for this. Except when he was, because you see sometimes in the comics he would give her a large behind. Also, Jose just really loved doing pinup art of Gwen on covers. Like seriously, he got crazy sometimes. Itsy Bitsy. First appearing in Spider-Man Deadpool issue 8 in August 2016, Itsy Bitsy is the result of a revenge plot against Spider-Man and Deadpool by Jack Hammer. His plan was to inject a drug-addicted woman with genetic samples of the two heroes, so that he would be able to create the ultimate weapon to kill them. Through this procedure, she gained the ability to shoot organic webs, wall crawl, use spider sense, shoot corrosive acid, and had super strength. She also just loved using guns and swords like Deadpool. Now, unfortunately for Jack Hammer, Itsy Bitsy decided against killing both Spidey and Deadpool, and instead wanted to fight crime with them by killing criminals. This was something that Spider-Man was not exactly a fan of. Even Deadpool wasn't a fan, because at this time he was trying not to kill criminals. But if Itsy Bitsy tried to kill criminals in any other point in Deadpool's history, the dude would have been like, okay, go ahead, go at it, I don't care. Weirdly enough, Itsy Bitsy saying that she was going to kill criminals was enough for Peter to be like, I might have to kill her. This is the only way. I might have to do it. And had to be talked down by Deadpool not to kill her during their final fight with her. By the end of the fight, nobody actually died, despite Deadpool thinking he killed Itsy Bitsy, and Itsy Bitsy was stuck in the form of a spider for a while, after being pushed through a plasma breeder thingy. And since 2017, she hasn't been seen since. MS-DOS The Sinister Six. Spider-Man The Sinister Six is a video game released in 1996. It's a choose-your-own-adventure puzzle game that has Spider-Man taking on Doc Ock, Hobgoblin, Chameleon, Mysterio, Vulture, and Shocker, as they hatch a scheme involving virtual reality. It's become a pretty obscure Spider-Man game, and for good reason. It received extremely negative reviews when it was released, and it wasn't very popular at the time, even by players. In fact, nowadays, the game is most well known for its horrible cutscenes.
You may have defeated the muscle, but you haven't beaten the brains behind the Sinister Six.
You did it, Spider-Man. You saved him.
Thank you for saving me from the Sinister Six, Spider-Man. Always wanted to meet you. I'm a big fan.
And so Spider-Man has saved the day.
I can't believe Dr. Octopus escaped.
My new partner and I are here to audition. We heard you needed terrorists, and we're naturals for the part.
Who's that imposter? He doesn't even move like me.
Explosives are rigged to the bottom of that bus. When the gas tank falls below a quarter of a tank, an electric charge will trigger a detonator wired to the bus's ignition. When it explodes, it will destroy this set and everyone on the bus. Don't try turning the key off because that will trigger the bomb as well. Thanks to Spider-Man, no one can escape the bus. This is a warning to all those who oppose the Sinister Six. Keep the cameras rolling, ladies and gentlemen. This will be an explosion that will make film history. Farewell.
All right, calm down. What can I do?
Back there and give them the bad news about my arrest.
You're crazy. Are you all right, Mr. Mason?
Get away from me. Call the police. He tried to kill me.
Wait a minute. I tried to save you.
No! Spider-Man and I were working together. Then he turned on me. He wanted the glory of killing Mason for himself. Spider-Man, you traitor!
So, you were trying to kill me. Cold-blooded murderer. You're worse than I thought you were. You see, New York, I was telling the truth about this spider villain.
You know, you have a mouth like a convenience store, open day and night. I tried to save your life, even though you've been blasting me all over the city every chance you get.
Get the police in here now!
Gameplay-wise, it had a bunch of mini-games for you to play as you fight the Sinister Six. Also, you could choose your own dialogue, search for clues and a time limit, etc. While this game may not be very good, at least you can play this game. The same can't be said for its sequel, which brings me to the next entry. Spider-Man: The Venom Factor. The Venom Factor is a cancelled video game that was in development from 1996 to 1997, and was a sequel to Spider-Man: The Sinister Six. It was going to continue to be a choose-your-own-adventure game, but would use entirely 3D characters and backgrounds, instead of the mix of 2D and 3D like the previous installment. This game's plot was going to be an adaptation of the novel of the same name, released all the way back in 1994, so it would have had Spider-Man battling both Venom and Hobgoblin. Now, this game is not only a cancelled Spider-Man game, but it's also a lost Spider-Man game, as it was actually fully completed, as it was listed as a completed game on the developers, Sapphire's, website. Set for release in 1997, the game would never release, despite its completion, and it remains a mystery as to why it was never released. Spider-Man, first appearing in Armor Wars issue 1 in a half, released in May 2015, Peter Nathan Urich became this universe's Spider-Man, but instead of an I, he had a Y in his name. Instead of being bitten by a spider, his Iron Man-like armor was infected with the spider virus, which gave him the abilities of Spider-Man. You see, in this universe, everyone is forced to wear a suit of armor for their entire lives, via neural inhibitors, in order to avoid an airborne disease. When the spider virus infected his suit, it broke these inhibitors and allowed him to be a vigilante, and spread the truth about the disease, about how the disease was created by Howard Stark. Though his run as a vigilante didn't last very long, as when he discovered who created the virus, he was murdered by Tony Stark. Though eventually his death would be avenged by this universe's War Machine after investigating his death, which eventually led to him taking Tony Stark down. She-Venom Endgame. So in Venom Center Takes All issue 3, released in September 1995, the world will be introduced to She-Venom. Despite her not really appearing too often as She-Venom, she's become fairly popular, even appearing in the 2018 Venom film, and briefly in its sequel. Though, what many fans forget is that She-Venom actually has a really tragic ending to her. Because as her time as She-Venom, Anne Wang would develop a fear of the symbiote. And in Amazing Spider-Man issue 19, released in May 2000, Eddie Brock would go to her apartment in an attempt to mend their relationship. While there, she saw Spider-Man swinging around the city wearing a black costume. Not the symbiote, he was just wearing a black Spider-Man costume. This caused her to freak out and think the symbiote was going to kill her. So Eddie then turned into Venom in front of her, good idea, to go attack Spider-Man as a way of protecting her. This did not do very well for Anne's mental health, as she almost instantly then jumped out of her apartment window to her death. You know, something tells me the Venom films are probably not going to adapt this. Video Man. First appearing in the cartoon Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, Video Man is a 2D creation created by Electro with the ability to bring video game characters to life, manipulate electronics, and suck people into video games, and drain bioenergy from mutants. It's a weird creation that only faced off against Spider-Man and his friends twice before never showing up again. That is until Spider-Man Family featuring Amazing Friends, released in August of 2006, where out of nowhere, Video Man made his debut in the main Marvel timeline with no origin given. He just shows up as a 2D supervillain that was almost able to defeat Spider-Man. Luckily for Parker, Firestar and Iceman were nearby, and Iceman was able to freeze Video Man's processor unit, causing Video Man's physical form to disappear. Peter would then go on to put the processor in his freezer, as letting it thaw would release Video Man. So to this day, Peter still has a sentient computer villain thing frozen in his freezer. El Moretto. Okay, so as I was making this Iceberg, it was announced that Sony is making an El Moretto movie set in the Sump universe. Who is El Moretto? Well, he's not El Moretto the Aztec Zombie, a separate comic character unrelated to Marvel, but has the same name. First appearing in Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man issue 6, released in May 2006, Marvel's El Moretto is the latest in a line of wrestlers with magic powers. Juan Carlos Sanchez didn't want to be the latest El Moretto, and refused to take part of the ritual to get these powers. This resulted in his dad's death, and he was given 10 years to train to become a magic wrestler, in order to defeat and unmask a masked hero. So 10 years go by, and he fights Spider-Man, loses, and that's it. No, I'm not exaggerating, that's his history. He had that little magic wrestler thing, and then showed up for 2 comic issues, left, and has literally never been seen in a comic, cartoon, movie, web strip even, since 2006. And so Sony were like, yeah, we'll give this guy a movie, because did they not learn a lesson from Morbius bombing? Did they just not learn a lesson? I mean, I guess this is Sony, they don't learn lessons, but come on, really? Spider-Man sells Twinkies. During the 1970s, Hostess would team up with Marvel to advertise Twinkies and other Hostess products, like fruit pies and cupcakes, for 86 comic ads. In this universe, Spider-Man just loves solving problems with Hostess products. Stopping a staged boxing match, throw a cupcake into the ref's mouth, convincing Madam Web to stop framing him for crimes, offer to give her a ton of Twinkies. Dude gets captured by a criminal, gives the criminal some fruit pies, and then gets away. Wait, did this criminal just say his taste buds are panting? There were other heroes involved in these promotions, like Iron Man, Hulk, Captain Marvel, The Thing, Human Torch, and Captain America, but Spider-Man is probably the most notable out of all of these. This is because this universe's Spider-Man actually shows up again in Spider-Verse issue 1, released in November of 2014, where he dies. Though in this comic he was officially given the name Golden Sponge Cake Spider-Man, as a way to avoid copyright infringement from saying Hostess. George Stacy becomes Spider-Man. First appearing in Vault of Spiders issue 2, released in November of 2018, Police Detective George Stacy was your average police detective when he presumably got bitten by a radioactive spider. Yeah, they don't really go into detail about his backstory, they just kind of throw you in. Basically, it's George Stacy working as the vigilante, the Spider. He has most of Spider-Man's abilities, and even has weapons. Non-lethal weapons, though, like a police baton and a gun. Okay, so maybe he does use lethal weapons sometimes, but for the most part, he just uses his fists. To be honest with you, I don't really have much else to say here, other than his universe has a gender-bent shocker named Anita Dillon. I don't really have much else to add because he's literally only appeared twice. Once in a short story set in his world, and once in Spider-Geddon, where he's briefly seen as part of the Spider Army. The Looter. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man issue 36, released in February of 1966, Norton G. Fester became the thief known as the Looter, after, and I'm serious here, getting super strength from a gas released from a meteorite that crashed into Earth and was used by scientists to create new formulas for hair tonic, despite Norton believing that the meteorite contained the answer to the riddle of the universe. Yeah, pretty wild stuff. Imagine finding a meteorite and your first response is to make hair tonic out of it. Anyways, after being defeated by Spider-Man while fighting with a balloon, Norton changed his supervillain name to Meteor Man. Probably because Meteor Man was a slightly better name than just the Looter. But he still was using the balloon, which, didn't really work out very well, and he was defeated again. And for the next few decades, he would try and steal the meteorite again and again and again, so that he could become more powerful, or at the very least, keep his powers, as if he's away from the meteorite for too long, he'll lose his powers. He also went back to being called the Looter, because it's a far more iconic name. After battling Spider-Man for some time, he'd eventually join forces with a bunch of D-list supervillains, and not actually fight, but instead create a support group called Supervillains Anonymous, that would meet at a church. He's also got a little song he came up with. Kang's Spider-Man android. First appearing in Avengers 11, released in October 1964, this android, later calling himself Time Spinner, was created by Kang the Conqueror. He was sent back into the past by a future version of Kang, and was created after Kang spied on Peter Parker, coming to the conclusion that he's the perfect candidate to replace with an android, as none of the other Avengers know his identity, or really much about him at all. The android would then go on to lead the Avengers into a trap that caused them to become depowered, so the android would be able to annihilate them in a fight. But then the real Spider-Man showed up and quickly defeated his robotic brother. But this wouldn't actually be the last time we'd see Kang's Spider-Man robot. Over 30 years later, in Spider-Man Team Up issue 4, released in July of 1996, Ben Reilly teams up with the Avengers to battle his evil robot clone again. It turns out that the robotic counterpart was never actually destroyed, and he gained some new powers. The robot started acting out and attacked some of the Avengers, which made everyone confused. I mean, this was happening during the Clone Saga, so Ben was concerned it was just another clone by Jackal. By this point in time, the robots kidnapped Iron Man, thinking that it's his master, which causes the rest of the Avengers and Ben to arrive to beat the crap out of the robot, who's now calling himself Time Spinner. Why is he calling himself that? Because he can now rapidly age people in places using a complicated form of energy. Time Spinner may have been able to take out a few Avengers by himself, but with the entire team and Ben Reilly, he was quickly defeated, after his head was blown up by Vision. Powerless. Powerless is a 6-issue miniseries written by Matt Chernes and Peter Johnson, released from August of 2004 to January 2005. It's a what-if story starring the Watcher, who wakes up from a coma in the real world, or a world that's just like the real world, but it's not actually the real world because it's a comic book. It's revealed that the mainline Marvel Universe was actually just a dream of his in his coma. However, everyone, or at least most of the people in his dream, are also real. Take Peter Parker, for example, who in this universe is your average high school student who got bitten by a spider, which caused his arm to shrivel up, which caused him to develop severe depression. Well, that and the death of his parents and his Uncle Ben's recent murder. Eventually, he's convinced by Norman Osborn to conduct some industrial espionage on Stark Industries. And by convinced, I mean Norman basically stalked this kid until he said yes. This leads to him eventually telling Norman and his men to go ask Tony Stark himself if they want to know what's up. Which leads into a series of events that conclude with Gwen Stacy being kidnapped by Norman in exchange for Peter giving up Stark Industries secrets. Peter's story comes to an end when he confronts Norman and throws a file containing Stark Industries secrets off a building, leading to Norman jumping off the roof to his death because the man really wanted those secrets. Web Slinger. Since I mentioned some theme park attractions in the last Iceberg, I thought I'd throw in one here. Web Slingers, a Spider-Man adventure, is a theme park attraction at Avengers Campus in California and France. The ride is hosted by Spider-Man, who's actually played by Tom Holland, and Sharon. You know, Spider-Man's AI partner in Spider-Man Homecoming, that was hated on so much they basically wrote her out of the MCU. Oh wait, no, that was Karen. Oh, Sharon's a new AI made for the ride. Why didn't they just use Karen? It's based on the MCU. Whatever, doesn't really matter. Anyways, the plot of the ride has you battling a bunch of spider bots that go haywire around the MCU. In fact, you actually do fight them, as you can fire off webs at the bots, so that's pretty neat. Spider-Man 1969. Spider-Man is a fan film from 1969 that runs for around 12 minutes. Directed and written by Donald F. Glutt, the film tells the story of Spider-Man rescuing a woman from the original villain, Dr. Lightning. It remained as rare media for decades until it was released as a special feature in the documentary I Was a Teenage Movie Maker, a 2006 documentary about Glutt. This fan film was well known for its use of mixed media, combining stop motion with live action, and also for being the earliest known Spider-Man fan film. Years after its release, Donald F. Glutt would go on to write for Marvel Comics. Razorback. First appearing in Peter Parker The Spectacular Spider-Man issue 12, released in August of 1977, Buford T. Hollis was a small-time superhero in Arkansas who teamed up with Spider-Man to save his sister from a cult led by Man-Beast in New York. He's a rather unique-looking hero with a warthog helmet that doesn't cover his face, so it's kind of useless, and a green bodysuit. He's also a genius when it comes to being a mechanic, so there's also that. Plus, he's a decent fighter, being able to go toe-to-toe with Spider-Man. The only reason he's fought Spider-Man is because for some reason he thought fighting was the way superheroes introduce themselves to other superheroes. Truthfully, Razorback isn't really related that much to Spider-Man outside of a few team-ups and a supporting role in a lot of Spider-Man novels in the 90s. But I thought I'd include him in this iceberg because he originates from a Spider-Man comic. Now as for his history, Razorback doesn't really have too much more history, as his unique way of talking and his costume have pretty much prevented most writers from using him. And when they do use him, he's not usually a serious character. He's gone to space though and gained superpowers at one point, and worked with She-Hulk a couple times, so I guess there's that. Genetically altered Aunt May actress. For several issues, starting in Amazing Spider-Man issue 392, released in June 1994, Aunt May wasn't actually Aunt May. You see, during issue 392, May was abducted and replaced with an imposter by the Green Goblin. Though we don't actually see this. This was like a retcon later down the line, but technically, in universe, these events happened during this issue. This imposter was a dying elderly actress who was genetically modified to look identical to Aunt May, and was convinced by Norman Osborn to work with him to screw with Peter. After waking up from a coma, this alternate May told Peter in a heartfelt moment that she knew he was Spider-Man before dying almost immediately afterwards. This really screwed with Peter mentally, which was all part of Norman's plan. Eventually, Norman would reveal to Peter that Aunt May was still alive to screw with him even more years later. Like, okay, I get Norman hates Spider-Man, but the amount of money it must have been to change, not just somebody's appearance, but their genetic matrix just to screw with somebody mentally, it's gotta be a lot of money. Also, this woman who played May is just evil. Imagine agreeing to mentally screw with somebody by pretending to be their mother figure. Anyways, this retcon is one of the most hated Marvel retcons ever, because it ruined the May knowing Peter Parker was Spider-Man scene. So yeah, Aunt May was back, and she didn't know Peter was Mr. Webhead anymore. The Galactic Alliance of Spider-Men. Before the Spider-Army and Spider-Verse, there was the Galactic Alliance of Spider-Men, who first appeared in, well actually no, only appearing in Marvel Comic Presents issue 1, released in September 2007. They're a group of Spider-Men living in the mainline Marvel Universe in space. And as the name suggests, they're an alliance of Spider-Men from across the multiverse. We meet this group as Peter is brought into the alliance by Spider-Mech, who tries to get him to join the team. Peter refuses and tries to leave, but Spider-Mech isn't having any of that. And after a brief scuffle, it's revealed that Spider-Mech is actually an imposter who's trying to throw the alliance off the trail of the invading Doctopoids, a species of giant octopus robots. This causes a riot between the Spider-Men, and Peter is knocked into a portal that sends him home. He's convinced it was just a dream, but nope, it's not, because we see the subspace spider signal that Spider-Man gave him still in his room. And ever since this comic, the Alliance has never made another appearance or mention. None of the Spider-Men shown in this alliance even show up in either Spider-Verse or Spider-Geddon. Probably for the best, because there's a member named Longlegs, who is just a spider with Spider-Man's head, who rides a rocket bike, and I don't want to see him ever again. Marvel Swimsuit Special. So from June 1992 all the way to December 1995, a series of 4, though there technically was a comic like this released in 1991, but it's technically not part of the same series, comic issues were released. These were parodies of swimsuit model magazines, and by parody, I mean no, it's just officially licensed pinup art. They don't really do anything parodying magazines, they just show off women from the Marvel Universe in bathing suits. But for some reason, not my wife She-Venom. I guess the world wasn't ready for monster girls. Jokes aside, there's also dudes shown off like Luke Cage and the Punisher, even Ghost Rider, which is the closest the comic comes to being a parody. There was also a plot to this series. You see, all these issues are canon, and happen either because Tony Stark is doing a charity shoot, Wasp is hosting a shoot in Wakanda for Black Panther's wedding, or it's Pip the Troll mind-controlling everyone to dress up in swimsuits so he can take photos for his personal collection. Evil. Just objectively evil. Now, why am I talking about this in a Spider-Man iceberg? Well, because Black Cat, Mary Jane Watson, and Silver Sable are in it. May is also there if you're, into that. Yeah, I admit, this is not really a good excuse. I just really wanted to talk about this series. Spiders-Man. First appearing in Spider-Geddon issue 3, released in November of 2018, Peter Parker was your ordinary student, when suddenly he fell into a colony of radioactive spiders, which is literally every person on the planet's worst fear. These spiders then devoured him, but in the process absorbed his consciousness, because this is a comic book. and because of this, the spider hive took the form of a human-like body and called itself Spider's Man, where they go out to fight crime. If you remember Swarm from the last Spider-Man Iceberg, you'll probably realize this origin story is a direct reference to his origin story. But yeah, this variation of Spider-Man is literally a colony of thousands of spiders. Disgusting. Evil. What else can I say? Iceberg. I 100% mispronounced that, I apologize, but first appearing in Osborn issue 1, released in November 2010, Iceberg is a pretty unique Spider-Man villain, because he's not a bad scientist or anything like that. He's just a literal god. He's a South American god to be exact, and was a chimera-like being with snakes for hair, a lower half of a spider, and the upper half of a human. At some point, he was somehow captured by the US government, which is how Norman Osborn discovered him. Being a giant spider monster, he piqued Norman's interest, and was eventually recruited into the Dark Avengers. Like Scorpion before him, Norman had Iceberg pretend to be Spider-Man, but since he had a giant spider-like body, Norman had to give him a drug that turned him into something more resembling a human, with, 6 arms. And so began his career as part of the Dark Avengers. As part of the Dark Avengers, and going by the name Spider-Man, he'd go on many different missions battling the new Avengers, until he was eventually killed while in an alternate universe by Toxic Doxy by stepping on him while he was shrunken in Dark Avengers issue 190, released in May 2013. But since he's literally a god, I guess he could still be alive, but it's almost been a decade since his death, and Marvel has shown no interest in bringing him back. His powers include superhuman strength, speed, and agility, extremely good reflexes, healing, poisonous fangs, and he can produce organic webs. He's also based on the actual Moaka god, Iceberg. Again, probably mispronounced that, I apologize.
Don't miss out on the action. We'll be right back to Spider-Man Maximum Venom on Disney XD.
I'm okay.
You can swing into Burger King and get a BK Kids meal with a spectacular Spider-Man toy. 1 per kids meal now at Burger King.
I'm okay.
Where's Dad?
I think he's outside training.
Training?
To fight the forces of evil, sweetie.
That's one evil squirrel.
Now at Burger King, you can get one of 10 Spider-Man 3 toys with every kid's meal. Drop in to BK today.
Dad's okay. Okay.
Swing into adventure. Now back to Spider-Man, right here on Disney XD.
Spider-Bite. First appearing in Vaulted Spiders issue 1, released in October 2018, Margot is a very unique alternate universe Spider-Man, because she lives in Ready Player One. Okay, not Ready Player One, but in her universe, a majority of the people living there spend their time living as virtual avatars in cyberspace. And so, Margot becomes Spider-Bite, to stop cybercrimes as a form of community service. Despite her powers being tied to the cyber world, when she was recruited into the Spider Army during Spider-Geddon, she still had her Spider-Bite costume and powers. So, actually I can't think of any explanation except because it's cool, which, I mean, fair enough, her design is pretty cool. But yeah, in the cyberspace, she has all the abilities of Spider-Man. Radioactive. So when I talked about Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark in the last Iceberg, I failed to mention how Imagine Dragons wrote songs for the musical, but apparently the demos were, quote, too good, and many of the songs were evolved into their debut album, Night Visions, with Radioactive being one of those songs. Producer Alex the Kid hired the band to help him come up with ideas for the band U2, but, like I said, they were apparently, quote, too good. Now, obviously, the entire album wasn't made for Turn Off the Dark, but there's a decent chance 1 or 2 of the songs in the album were reworked from the cancelled Turn Off the Dark songs. That is, if all this is even true. I couldn't really find too many sources about this, except an Insider article and a Yahoo News article about the whole Imagine Dragons Radioactive Turn Off the Dark thing. So there's a decent chance this could just be a rumor or an exaggeration. I'm not entirely sure. Spider-X. First appearing in Midnight Suns Unlimited, issue 3, released in August of 1993, Brian Cornfield was a huge superhero fan, his favorite being Spider-Man, and so he spent his childhood fantasizing about them. However, when his mother was mugged, he sent letters out to numerous heroes in order to find the person who mugged her. When none of them responded to his letters, his fantasy became a reality, or should I say a nightmare, as Brian was given a demonic power similar to Spider-Man by a demon in order to find this mugger, thus becoming Spider-X. Also known as the Spider-Man to the Xth power. As Spider-X, he gained the ability to wall crawl, grew extra limbs, grew fangs that could project energy from his mouth, the ability to spit acidic venom from his mouth, superhuman speed, and strength. As this monster, he went around killing criminals, which caused the attention of Ghost Rider, Blaze, Morbius, and his personal hero, Spider-Man. This is how he actually met his end, as the 5 characters came face to face with the monster Zax, and Spider-X was killed in the conflict, only because he was hypnotized by Morbius to make him fight the monster, which resulted in him being eaten alive. Scrapped Spider-Man 2099 cartoon. Yeah, you heard right. There were plans for a Spider-Man 2099 cartoon at some point. In 1999, a cartoon about Mr. Miguel was being heavily considered by Marvel, but because Batman Beyond had premiered in 1999 as well, all ideas for a 2099 show were scrapped, as according to Marvel, Batman Beyond had, quote, covered that territory pretty well, and so Spider-Man Unlimited was created in its place. Spider-Man 3, The Battle Within. The Battle Within was a promotional game created for Spider-Man 3 in 2007. I'm not entirely sure who created the game, but the game has you playing as Spider-Man in quick-time events battling Sandman, New Goblin, and Venom. The game has each battle split up into parts, where you'll do one quick-time event where you have to hover the cursor over a symbol for a period of time before the next scene has to load. But if you leave your cursor on the symbol for too long, you'll end up giving in to the Symbiote, which will still give you the win, but you won't be able to unlock the other fights. The game also has a lot of differences from the film, like how Peter fights New Goblin in the black suit, he kills Sandman by pushing him in front of a train, and the Venom fight takes place in an indoor construction site. Also, we have confirmation that New Goblin's glider is called his Sky Stick. And I thought New Goblin couldn't get dorkier. The Spider vs. North Korea. First appearing in Ultimate Avengers issue 3, released in October 2009, the Spider is a very strange character. You see, his origin story was never revealed, nor was his actual identity. We do know that he was created by Gregory Stark, the older twin brother of Tony Stark, in order to take down North Korea. But we don't know if he was a clone or a normal person, as the Spider has joked before about being a clone made from the DNA of Spider-Man and Professor X. He was even referred to as an It by Gregory Stark. So he might have been a clone? A homunculus? Anyways, he's a bit of a wild card, as while he was part of the Avengers at one point, he was kept in a cell. He only appeared around 4 times in the Ultimate Universe, before finally being killed off in Ultimate Avengers vs. New Ultimates issue 6, released in July 2011, by Hawkeye with a giant slab of concrete during an uprising in North Korea orchestrated by S.H.I.E.L.D. He also talked a dude into endgaming himself at one point, so he's not really a good dude. Spider-Man in War of the Worlds. So Earth 691 first appeared in Marvel Superheroes issue 18, released in October 1968, and it's a very strange universe. While it's home to the Guardians of the Galaxy of the 31st century, it's also a universe where the Martians from H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds invaded Earth in 1901. Yes, War of the Worlds happened in this universe. Despite aliens invading the Earth, the world governments were able to hide the truth after they won the war, as they created a disinformation campaign and then created the novel War of the Worlds to trick people into thinking that it was actually just a book. But then 100 years later in 2001, the Martians attacked again, but this time the war was far more devastating, as the Martians destroyed all of humanity's nuclear weapons, and they deployed chemical weapons to kill off most of humanity. This initial assault would be called the One Night War. And then during the second assault, Captain America, Hawkeye, Spider-Man, and other superheroes attempted to fight back against the Martians. but they all were eventually killed off, with Spider-Man being the last superhero alive for some time until his eventual death. But his remains were then taken by the Martian scientist Ripjack, who injected Peter's DNA into his own body, giving him superpowers, and becoming a villain for the Guardians of the Galaxy. Cancelled Shattered Dimensions Edge of Time remasters. According to an anonymous source at Activision via Reddit, Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions and Edge of Time were going to get remastered around 2018 to leech off of Spider-Man PS4's hype. These remasters never ended up happening because Activision got greedy. Shocker, I know. You see, in the 2010s, several Activision licensed Marvel games got remasters, or ports disguised as remasters, like Marvel Ultimate Alliance 1, Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2, and Deadpool. These were decent enough successes that Activision were like, we want to be the only studio to make Marvel games again. So while negotiating the remasters, which by the way were already being prototyped, they started pushing for the rights to make new Marvel games. And that killed the deal. But don't get too sad, because these remasters were described by an anonymous source as quick moneymakers. So realistically, they'd just be ports disguised as remasters. Paper Doll. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man issue 559, released in May 2008, Piper Dolly was your average girl who was put into a dimensional compressor. Happens all the time. This horrific incident gave her strange abilities, her main power being the power to become two-dimensional, which results in her being as flat as paper, thus her supervillain name, Paper Doll. In this form, her body becomes razor sharp, but at the cost of her lung capacity being diminished. She can also wrap around somebody and suck all of their fluids out of them. Just evil. Anyways, she crosses paths with Spider-Man because she's the actor Bobby Carr's stalker, and will kill anyone who gets in her way, is romantic towards Bobby, or troubles Bobby in any way. After fighting Spider-Man in a handful of appearances, she stopped showing up in the comics until Amazing Spider-Man issue 19, released in April 2019, as a cameo. But besides that cameo, she's been pretty much abandoned by Marvel. Spider-Man 2211. First appearing in Spider-Man 2099 Meets Spider-Man, released in November 1995, Max Bourne is the Spider-Man of the 23rd century, and thus has a ton of gadgets. Take his armor for example, which is completely bulletproof, has lock-on webbing, electro-webbing, built-in oxygen, 4 Doc Ock-like arms, rocket boots, and even the ability to view alternate timelines, perform mind wipes, and forecast future events. So yeah, he's kind of OP. Being from the future, Max Bourne is part of the Temporal Police Unit called Totem, aka the Temporal Oversight Team Eliminating Mistakes, that prevent time disruptions. Unlike many other Spider-Men, his real identity is actually known to authorities, but not the general public. But like Spider-Man, Hobgoblin is one of his many villains. But this Hobgoblin is unique in that it's his daughter, Robin Bourne, who is eventually wiped from existence after her dad deflected her retcon bombs back at her, causing her to cease from reality along with everyone's memories of her. Yeah, she had retcon bombs that, wipe people from existence. Bet you didn't think there'd be a Spider-Man who basically killed his own daughter. Kraven the Hunter in Black Panther. While everyone loves Killmonger in the MCU, we almost never got him. In 2018, Black Panther director Ryan Coogler revealed that he originally wanted Kraven the Hunter to be the villain of the film. This is because Coogler is a huge fan of Kraven, and said in a quote, "Being a Marvel fan, you want to grab all the characters. You realize there's contractual things. You don't have the character. There is a Christopher Priest run that was pretty heavy. There's a big scene where Panther's fighting Kraven the Hunter. I've always loved Kraven the Hunter in almost every iteration. So there was a moment. Can I grab Kraven?" And they were, nah, you don't have Kraven. He was one where I thought, oh man. But I don't even know if he would have worked in the movie we ended up with. This was the early days. Spider-Man Classic. In 2008 and 2009, a sequel to Web of Shadows titled Spider-Man Classic was in development. Though the game would have kind of been like an Edge of Time style sequel. What I mean by that is the game would have been smaller in scope than the previous installment. It would have been an anthology where Spider-Man would go around fighting some of his classic villains, thus the title. B.D. Fulton, an artist who worked in the game, said, "Our intention was to revisit classic Spider-Man villainy in short story fashion, like a best of anthology of boss fights, told in panel-by-panel faithfulness to the original comic. As such, the game would have been a who's who of Spidey's rogues gallery, minus Venom, as we had just spent 2 years telling the biggest ever Spider-Man vs. Venom story. Now we can speculate all day on which villains would be in the game, but the only two we know for a fact were going to be in the game were Carnage and Mysterio. We also know that Wolverine would have been a playable character in the game as well. Sadly, the game was cancelled due to Shaba Games shutting down on October 8th, 2009. Uncle Ben abuses Peter. In X-Men Unlimited issue 41, released in February 2003, the Exiles, Blink and Nocturne, discover a terrible alternate universe where Peter Parker's father murdered his wife and then Avengers Endgamed himself. This resulted in Peter living with Uncle Ben and Aunt May, but in this universe, Uncle Ben was physically and verbally abusive towards Peter, forcing him to stay in the basement of the house. This is where Peter would meet Spider-God, a giant spider monster that offered to get revenge for Peter, to which Peter accepted. And so the monster then killed Ben and May, only for him to get attacked by this universe's Wolverine, who had been found earlier in the story by Blink and Nocturne. The comic ends with Blink and Nocturne separating Peter from the monster. They then leave the universe and leave Peter by himself. Unknowns to them, Peter got bit by the spider monster, and so presumably, he'll become Spider-Man one day. Chitlock the Chit-Kun-Ka? I don't think I pronounced that right. First appearing in Sensational Spider-Man issue 13, released in February 1997, Chitlock is one of Spider-Man's more unique one-off villains. His powers include superhuman strength, speed, a spiked tail, razor-sharp claws, and flight. Though he's not really a he, it's more of just an it, as it's a monster. Its species is a Chit-Kun-Ka that lives in the Savage Land. Centuries ago, it was worshipped by the Fall People, a tribe of people who live in the Savage Land, despite Chitlock trying to kill them during their first encounter. They believed that eventually this monster would save them from a future disaster. So back in the present, or I guess 1997, Chitlock wakes up from hibernation due to Roxxon's presence in the Savage Land, which causes many of the monsters from the Savage Land to flee to Florida, where they come into contact with Hulk. Confused by the monsters, Hulk travels to the Savage Land, where he discovers Chitlock, and the two just beat the crap out of each other for a few days, where they eventually fight into the middle of another fight between Spider-Man and Stegoron. The two heroes and villain then team up to battle Chitlock, with Stegoron even ordering several T-Rexes to attack the weird bird monster. Seriously, they just go to town on this thing. Realizing what's going on, Spidey leads Hulk, Stegoron, and an army of dinosaurs to destroy all the Roxxon stations in the Savage Land, like they're taking down radio towers in a Far Cry game. The leader of Roxxon's operations, Dr. Gerald Roth, then attempts to flood the Savage Land to get rid of the evidence of Roxxon's crimes, but thanks to Chitlock creating a giant hole in the Savage Land, the floodwater simply drains into it. The trio and their dinosaurs are then able to destroy all of Roxxon's presence in the Savage Land, and Gerald Roth is eventually devoured by Chitlock. Afterwards, the chicken monster heads off to bed, never to be seen again, except for a brief cameo in a Superhero Squad comic in 2010. The Green Goblin's Last Stand. This is a fan film from 1992, directed, written, starring, and produced by Dan Poole. This fan film is an adaptation of The Night Gwen Stacy Died. It's an incredibly popular fan film that runs for around 46 minutes, which is a lot longer than a lot of other fan films of that era. What's interesting about this fan film is that it wasn't originally very popular. In fact, when it was created, the film wasn't really well known at all, but eventually began to circulate at conventions via bootleg copies. And since then, it's got a serious following, with even an endorsement from Stan Lee in a documentary made about the making of the film. All this acclaim and interest in the film is well deserved, as Poole actually did all of his own stunts. One stunt even had him swinging on a rope from an abandoned high-rise 4 stories in the air without a safety net. You know, a little dangerous. One final thing to note is that the film had a trailer released for it that featured many different characters that didn't actually appear in the film, like Mysterio, Bullseye, J. Jonah Jameson, and I think Venom? Although that just could be like Spider-Man, but the shadows make him look black. Avatar's Covenant of the Shield. This is a 3-issue miniseries released from September to November 2000, written by Lem Kaminsky. Originally intended to be a 12-issue miniseries about the Avengers and other Marvel characters, reimagined in a fantasy setting, the story was scaled down to just to 3 issues due to Marvel being in financial trouble. While the story is centered around this universe's Captain America, named Captain Avalon, Spider-Man and other Spidey-related characters also make appearances. Take the 6 most sinister, which include Goblin King, Huntsman, Jolt, Tentaculus, Sandstorm, Talon, and Mysterium. Then, of course, there's the man himself, Spider-Man, or as he's known in this universe, Web-Slinger. Web-Slinger is actually a pretty tragic character. Originally a normal kid that's just fascinated by spiders, he met this universe's Madame Web, who gave him some spider-like powers, on the condition that he never used these powers for his own interests. So like a day later, the kid used his powers for his own interests, and stopped his uncle from being robbed. And so, Madame Web turns him into a spider-like monster. Now as Web-Slinger, he spends the rest of his days protecting Webwood, the forest where he met Madame Web. Peter's son is a mutant. In a story featured in What If issue 88, released in June 1996, Peter Parker in this universe continued to mutate after being bitten by the spider, but never actually became Spider-Man in this universe. His increased mutations would eventually cause him to transform temporarily into a giant monster that wanted nothing more than to devour people. This understandably caused Gwen Stacy, his wife, to abandon him, or at least that's what he told his son, because there's actually a pretty good chance that Peter may have accidentally eaten her. Anyways, they had a kid together named Ben, and Peter wasn't really the best father in the world, because he spent all this time trying to find a cure for his mutation, which he realized his son inherited. He'd eventually redeem himself to his son after his son's mutation was revealed to the world, which caused a mob to attempt to kill him. And so Peter transformed to protect his son, but was eventually overwhelmed by the mob and killed. What a nice guy. Dude still probably ate his wife, though. The Lost 1974 Spider-Man vs. Kraven fan film. In 1974, a fan film directed by Bruce Cardozo was released called Spider-Man vs. Kraven the Hunter. The film came to be because Cardozo was fascinated by the challenges of producing superhero films, and so while in film class, asked permission to create a Spider-Man film, to which his teacher agreed. A ton of effort was put into the production of this film, as numerous costumes and props were created, and they even did some fairly innovative lighting effects. Despite the film being encouraged by Marvel Comics and Stan Lee himself, the film was released through screenings at conventions, and only screenings at conventions, with the last one taking place in 2005. Because of this, the film has never been released, and there's not even any bootlegs of it. Dan Poole, the director of The Green Goblin's Last Stand, which I talked about just a little bit earlier, even contacted Cardozo in 2004, asking if he could have a copy of the film, only to be outright denied, but Cardozo said that he'd show him the film if he had traveled to Cardozo's house in California. So could this film actually be found? Not likely, as Cardozo sadly passed away in 2015, and apparently only had one copy of the film on his computer, which was destroyed. It's a shame, but it doesn't seem like this fan film will ever be found. Doc Ock remembers Mary Jane. So in Superior Spider-Man issue 2, released in January 2013, something weird happens. Remember how in the first Iceberg I talked about how when Peter and Doc Ock swapped bodies, Peter was flooded with Otto's memories, including Ock's memory of him having fun with Aunt May? Well, the same thing happened to Otto. Yeah, while in Peter's body, he was given all the memories of every single time Peter and Mary Jane had fun. Yeah, it's a bit weird. It's a bit not good. The Spider Society. The Spider Society is a medieval secret society that worshipped spider deities that gave them free temporary tattoos that gave each member of the society spider powers. These temporary tattooed dudes were known as hunters and were chosen by the spirits of the hunter. They're basically a bloodline of really tough warriors. Spider-Woman was even a member of the Spider Society for a period of time, along with Peter Parker and Spider-Girl. This society actually exists in the mainline Marvel continuity, so yeah, Peter Parker in the mainline universe was once a member of an ancient secret society. Can I say ancient? Because they're from 1099, so like, would that count as ancient? Is that even medieval times? Oh, they were the medieval times, okay. 3 Dev Adam. Translated to Three Mighty Men, 3 Dev Adam is a Turkish superhero film directed by T. Fikret Ukak. released in 1973. It's about Santo, who is based on the real-life El Santo Mexican luchador, and Captain America battling Spider-Man, who's just called the Spider in this. He also has none of the spider-like powers we've seen in the comics. Instead, his only power is that he can just clone himself. So I guess that's cool. He also looks nothing like Spider-Man. The film was made very cheap and obviously wasn't licensed or made by Marvel. But despite this, the film was actually shown in theaters all across Turkey, and eventually led to other knockoff films like Turkish Star Wars and Turkish Rambo. And that was the second Spider-Man Iceberg. I hope you guys enjoyed. It took a lot of time to make this. I think it's one of my best icebergs personally. I really don't have much else to add outside of if you enjoyed it, maybe share it around, you know, put it on Twitter, put it on, I don't know, whatever social media you use, Reddit, Tumblr, Facebook even. Hope you don't use Facebook, but yeah, it's been fun making this one. I'm not exactly sure which iceberg I'm gonna make next. I know I put like a schedule on Twitter a while back ago, but I'm not really good at following those kind of schedules. So we'll see what happens. We'll see. But with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't really have much else to add, so have a good one.
Hello.